The moon hung full and heavy over the Arizona desert, casting long shadows across the parched earth. Nathaniel Redgrave's shovel bit into the hard ground with a hollow scrape. Each thrust was accompanied by a grunt, not from exertion, but from something deeper, something that lived in his bones. At 62, Nathaniel's frame remained solid, despite the years. His weathered hands, mapped with calluses and old scars, gripped the wooden handle with the practiced ease of a man who had dug his share of holes. Sweat trickled down his forehead, catching in the deep furrow of the scar that ran from his right temple to the edge of his jaw, a souvenir from Gettysburg that had long since faded to a silvery white against his sun-darkened skin. The grave was nearly 3 feet deep now. Enough for purpose, not enough for peace. His breath came in ragged pulls as he paused, leaning on the shovel and staring down into the darkness he'd carved from the earth. "This ain't the first time I've buried someone," he whispered to the silent desert. "But it might be the last." The wind picked up, sending a whisper through the sparse mesquite trees surrounding his small ranch. It carried the scent of sage and dust, and something else, a memory. Nathaniel closed his eyes, and the desert night around him dissolved into another time just 3 days earlier. The sunset had painted the Mojave in hues of fire. Nathaniel had been checking his fence line, a daily ritual born of discipline rather than necessity. No one came out this way unless they were lost or running from something. Sometimes both. He'd spotted the odd shape from a distance, just a dark lump beneath a scatter of dried palm fronds that had no business being there so far from any palm trees. Nature had its ways of moving things, but this arrangement seemed deliberate, like someone had tried to hide something. Or someone. His mare Sadie had snorted nervously as they approached. Nathaniel's hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver on his hip, a gesture ingrained from years when a moment's hesitation meant death. "Easy, girl," he murmured, swinging down from the saddle. The fronds had been thrown haphazardly like an afterthought. When he pulled them aside with the toe of his boot, the sight beneath stole his breath. A woman lay curled on her side, her dress torn to dirty ribbons, her skin a canvas of purple bruises and angry red welts. Dirt and blood had formed a crust along one side of her face. Her cracked lips were parted slightly, and for a moment Nathaniel thought she was already gone. Then her eyelids fluttered. Nathaniel knelt beside her, his knees protesting against the hard ground. He gently turned her face toward him, and her eyes opened, just barely revealing irises so dark they almost matched her pupils. Recognition flickered there, not of him personally, but of what he was, another man who might hurt her. Her lips moved, and Nathaniel leaned closer to catch the whisper. "Bury me here." The words were barely audible, carried on a breath that seemed it might be her last. "I don't deserve to be saved." Something cold settled in Nathaniel's chest. Not panic, not shock, but a familiar weight, the leaden feeling of standing at a crossroads where all paths led to pain. He'd buried plenty of folks before. Some he'd known, most he hadn't. Some had deserved it, others had not. He'd long ago stopped believing it mattered which was which. But burying the living, that was a line he hadn't yet crossed. "Can't do that, ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Not while you're still breathing." He slid his arms beneath her as gently as he could and lifted. She was so light, like lifting a child. Her head lolled against his chest, and a small whimper escaped her lips. It was the sound of someone who expected pain to follow. Pain, an unbroken chain stretching back further than memory. Nathaniel knew that sound. He'd heard it before from lips that had no business making it. "I got you now," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. "Ain't nobody going to hurt you anymore." A lie, perhaps. The world was built on hurting, but for now, it would have to do. The journey back to his ranch was slow, each hoofbeat jarring the woman in his arms. Nathaniel held her close, trying to absorb the worst of the impacts. By the time the simple wooden structure of his home came into view, twilight had deepened to true darkness with only the stars and a quarter moon providing any light. His ranch was modest, a small main house, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, a corral that had seen better days, and a storage shed. Not much to show for a life, but it was his, bought with blood money from a war that had taken far more than it had given. Inside, Nathaniel laid the woman on his own bed, the only one in the house. The lamplight revealed the full extent of her injuries, and a deep anger stirred in his gut. Someone had worked her over thoroughly methodically. These weren't the marks of a single beating, but accumulated abuse. He fetched water and clean rags, moving with the quiet efficiency of a man used to tending wounds. As he cleaned the dirt from her face, he saw that she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s. There was a strange delicacy to her features despite the swelling, something that spoke of mixed heritage. Her skin, where it wasn't bruised, had the warm copper tone of someone with native blood, but her facial structure hinted at European ancestry. Her breathing had steadied somewhat, though it remained shallow. Nathaniel managed to get a few sips of water between her lips, which she swallowed reflexively. "You're safe now," he said, more to fill the silence than because he thought she could hear him. "Rest easy." As he worked, his eyes occasionally drifted to the wall above his simple pine dresser, where a framed photograph hung slightly askew. It showed a younger version of himself in Union blue, standing stiffly beside 4 other men in similar uniforms. Their faces were serious as befitted men at war, but there was a certain pride there too. Pride that Nathaniel now recognized as the worst kind of foolishness. One face in the photograph had been deliberately cut out, leaving a jagged hole like a wound in the paper. The woman stirred, murmuring something in her delirium. Nathaniel leaned closer. "Fallon," she whispered the name falling from her lips. Like a curse. Fallon. Nathaniel froze his hand, still holding a damp cloth against her forehead. That name. Of all the names she could have spoken, it had to be that one. "Shh," he said, his voice suddenly hoarse. "Don't trouble yourself with names now." She didn't respond, slipping back into unconsciousness. Nathaniel sat back in his chair, a heavy weariness settling over him that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Some ghosts, it seemed, refused to stay buried. For 2 days, Nathaniel kept vigil. The woman whose name he still didn't know drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she would wake with a start, eyes wide with terror, and he would have to speak softly, reassuring her that she was safe until the panic subsided. Other times, she would open her eyes calmly, looking around the room with a lucidity that lasted only moments before sleep claimed her again. Nathaniel slept in the old rocking chair beside the bed, catching what rest he could between her moments of distress. When he wasn't watching over her, he tended to his small herd of cattle and the few horses in his corral. Life didn't stop for tragedy. That was one of the harsh lessons the desert taught. On the morning of the 3rd day, he returned from feeding the livestock to find her sitting up in bed, her back against the headboard. She watched him enter with alert, wary eyes. "You're awake," he said, stopping just inside the doorway to give her space. She nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "Where am I?" "My ranch, about 15 miles east of Tucson." He kept his voice even, non-threatening. "Found you out in the desert 3 days ago." Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the sparse furnishings, the neatly kept space, the lack of feminine touches. "You live alone," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. And you've been caring for me. Again, not a question, but this time there was a note of suspicion, as if she was trying to determine his motive. Best I could, Nathaniel replied. I'm no doctor, but I've patched up my share of hurts. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes taking in the weathered lines of his face, the scar, the gray, streaking his once black hair. Why? She finally asked. Nathaniel considered the question. It was fair enough. Men who lived alone in the territories weren't generally known for their charitable acts, especially toward strange women. Couldn't very well leave you out there, he said simply. She looked down at her hands, which were folded in her lap atop the quilt. The knuckles of her right hand were split and scabbed over. I asked you to, she said quietly. Asked me to what? Bury me there. Her voice was stronger now, with an edge to it. That's what I said, wasn't it? Nathaniel nodded slowly. It was, but I've buried enough folks in my time. Didn't seem right to add another when there was still breath in her. Something flickered across her face, not quite gratitude, but perhaps a grudging acceptance. My name is Rebecca, she said after a pause. Rebecca Quinn. Nathaniel nodded. Nathaniel Redgrave. Well, Mr. Redgrave, I'm obliged for your help, but I'll be moving on as soon as I'm able. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. No offense, Miss Quinn, but you're in no condition to go anywhere just yet. Besides, where would you go? The question hung in the air between them. Rebecca's jaw tightened, and Nathaniel could see he'd struck a nerve. I'll find somewhere, she said, but the conviction in her voice was undermined by the uncertainty in her eyes. Nathaniel sighed. Look, you're welcome to stay until you're healed up proper. No strings attached. I've got the space, and it's no trouble. Rebecca regarded him skeptically. Men always want something, Mr. Redgrave. I'm a bit past wanting much of anything these days, he replied, his voice dry. Except maybe a quiet life, and a peaceful death in that order. A ghost of a smile touched her lips so brief he almost missed it. I'll stay. For now, she conceded. Until I can ride without reopening these cuts. Nathaniel nodded, satisfied. Fair enough. You hungry? I can fix something. Starving, she admitted. As Nathaniel turned to leave, she spoke again. Mr. Redgrave. He paused, looking back over his shoulder. Thank you. The words seemed to cost her something to say, but they were sincere. Nathaniel just nodded and continued to the kitchen. Some debts couldn't be acknowledged, let alone repaid. He had a feeling Rebecca Quinn understood that better than most. Over the next few days, as Rebecca regained her strength, Nathaniel learned bits and pieces of her story. She was careful with her words, revealing only what she felt necessary, but the outline became clear enough. She'd been held at what she called the Red House in Tombstone, a brothel that specialized in girls who couldn't or wouldn't leave. Some had been purchased outright, others had debts that never seemed to diminish no matter how many men they serviced. Rebecca had been there for nearly 3 years. How'd you end up there? Nathaniel asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in gold. Rebecca was silent for so long that he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, drained of emotion. After my village was destroyed, I was taken in by a settler family heading west. They died of fever 6 months later, all except the father. He sold me to pay for whiskey. She shrugged as if the transaction had been as unremarkable as the purchase of a horse. I was 16. Nathaniel felt a familiar heaviness in his chest. Your village, Rebecca's eyes remained fixed on the horizon. A mixed settlement near the Gila River. My father was Irish, a minister who came to bring Christianity to the savages. Instead, he fell in love with one. A faint smile touched her lips. My mother was Apache. She taught medicine to the women in the settlement. She fell silent again, and Nathaniel didn't press. Some memories were better left undisturbed. Instead, he asked, "How'd you get away from the Red House?" Rebecca's expression hardened. One of the regulars got too rough. Liked to hurt girls, really hurt them. The madame usually kept him away from me because I was valuable, different looking. She gestured vaguely at her face. But that night, he paid extra. Her hand unconsciously moved to her side where Nathaniel knew a particularly vicious bruise was still healing. He had a knife, said he was going to carve his name into me so everyone would know I was his. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes had taken on a distant look. I got hold of it, and then I used it. Nathaniel nodded, understanding perfectly. You did what you had to. I killed him, Rebecca said bluntly, turning to look at Nathaniel directly. Stabbed him in the neck and watched him bleed out on the floor. She seemed to be waiting for his judgment for some sign of horror or condemnation. Nathaniel just met her gaze evenly. Some men need killing, he said simply. Rebecca studied him for a moment longer, then turned back to the sunset. His name was Maxwell Fallon. He liked to brag about being a war hero, said he'd pacified the frontier, made it safe for decent folk. The name hit Nathaniel like a physical blow, though he kept his expression neutral. Inside, something cold and dark began to unfurl. Fallon, he repeated, his voice carefully controlled. Rebecca nodded. You've heard of him. Nathaniel's mind raced through the implications, the connections, the terrible symmetry of it all. Of all the brothels in all the territories she had ended up in, one frequented by Maxwell Fallon. And of all the men who might have found her in the desert afterward, it had been Nathaniel Redgrave. If there was a God, his sense of humor was cruel indeed. I knew a Fallon during the war, Nathaniel said after a moment. Mean son of a bitch. Liked hurting people too much. It wasn't a lie, but it was far from the whole truth. The truth was that Lieutenant Maxwell Fallon had served under Nathaniel's command during a campaign that no official records acknowledged. The truth was that Fallon had been the most eager, the most vicious when they'd surrounded that mixed settlement near the Gila River 17 years ago. The truth was that Nathaniel still heard the screams sometimes in the deepest part of the night, when sleep abandoned him. Was it the same man? Rebecca asked. Nathaniel stood suddenly, needing to move to do something with the restless energy coursing through him. Maybe, he said, not looking at her. It's a common enough name. But he knew. God help him, he knew. That night, after Rebecca had gone to bed in what was now established as her room, Nathaniel sat at his small kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey and a tarnished silver pocket watch laid out before him. He rarely drank these days. Alcohol loosened memories better left tightly bound, but tonight called for something to dull the edges. He flipped open the watch, revealing a small, faded photograph tucked inside the cover. A woman with kind eyes and a solemn expression looked back at him. Sarah, his wife of 22 years, gone now for 5. The consumption had taken her slowly, whittling away at her strength, until she was as insubstantial as morning mist. Near the end, she'd extracted a promise from him to make peace with their son, James. It was a promise Nathaniel had yet to fulfill. From a drawer in the table, he withdrew a stack of letters bound with twine. Each envelope was addressed to James Redgrave in Boston, Massachusetts. None had been sent. Nathaniel had written faithfully every month since Sarah's passing, pouring out his regrets, his explanations, his halting attempts at apology. But he'd never found the courage to actually mail them. How did you ask forgiveness for the unforgivable? How did you explain to your son that the father he'd once idolized had done things that would make the devil himself recoil? James had discovered the truth when he was 19, finding papers Nathaniel had kept from his military days. The argument that followed had been brief, but devastating. James had left the next morning, heading east to his mother's family in Boston. The last words he'd spoken to his father were simple: "You're dead to me." Nathaniel had respected his son's wishes, maintaining his distance, but Sarah's death had changed things. She'd been the bridge between them, keeping channels of communication open even when direct contact wasn't possible. With her gone, the silence had become absolute, except for the letters Nathaniel wrote and never sent. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him and dipped his pen in ink. The words came slowly, painfully. "James, I found a young woman in the desert 3 days ago. She was nearly dead, beaten something terrible. I brought her home, patched her up as best I could. Her name is Rebecca Quinn. She reminds me of Elena. In some ways, same quiet strength, same wariness. I think you would like her. Yesterday I learned something that I'm still trying to make sense of. The man who hurt her, the one she killed to escape, was Maxwell Fallon. Yes, that Fallon. The one from the Gila River operation. I don't know what to make of it. All these years later, and the past still finds ways to bleed into the present. It feels like judgment, though I couldn't say whose. Your mother once told me that we don't get to choose our redemption, that it comes in forms we'd never expect. I didn't understand her then. I'm not sure I do now either. I miss you, son. I miss your mother. The house is too quiet, without either of you. Your father, Nathaniel." He stared at the letter for a long time before folding it carefully and slipping it into an envelope. Like all the others, it would remain unsent, a conversation with a ghost. Nathaniel corked the whiskey bottle, having barely touched it. Some burdens couldn't be lightened by drink. Some ghosts wouldn't be silenced by anything but the truth. And the truth was a luxury Nathaniel Redgrave couldn't afford, not if he wanted Rebecca Quinn to heal under his roof. Because the moment she learned who he really was, who he had been, she would be gone. Or worse, she would stay consumed by a hatred that would destroy whatever fragile peace she had managed to find. Either way, he would lose her. And for reasons he couldn't quite articulate even to himself, that prospect left him feeling hollow. The next morning, Nathaniel found Rebecca in the barn, running her hand along the flank of his old mare, Sadie. The horse, normally skittish with strangers, stood calmly under her touch. "You've got a way with horses," Nathaniel observed from the doorway. Rebecca didn't startle at his voice, though he knew she must have heard his approach. "My mother taught me. She said animals always know the truth about a person, even when people don't." She turned to face him, and Nathaniel was struck by how much better she looked. The swelling in her face had subsided considerably, and though the bruises were still visible, they had begun to fade to a yellowish green. There was color in her cheeks now, and a clarity in her eyes that spoke of returning strength. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Better." She patted Sadie's neck once more before moving away from the horse. "Strong enough to be useful. I saw your vegetable garden out back. It could use some attention." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "You offering to help?" "I'm offering to earn my keep," Rebecca corrected. "I don't take charity well, Mr. Redgrave." "Nathaniel," he said, "if you're staying a while, might as well use my given name." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Nathaniel, then. And yes, I'd like to stay a while longer, if that's still acceptable to you." "It is," he assured her. "Place could use a woman's touch, truth be told." Been just me since my wife passed." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, and there was genuine sympathy in her voice. "Was it recent?" "5 years now." Nathaniel leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. "Consumption. Wasn't much I could do except watch her fade." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My mother died of fever when I was 14. My father followed 6 months later. Not from illness, he just lost the will to live, I think." "That happens sometimes," Nathaniel acknowledged. "Seen it in war. One man takes a bullet, another just gives up breathing for no reason anyone can see." "You were a soldier." It wasn't a question. "Union cavalry. Fought at Gettysburg, Antietam, handful of others. After the war ended, they kept some of us on to deal with frontier issues." The euphemism tasted bitter on his tongue. Rebecca's expression shuddered slightly at the mention of frontier issues, but she didn't comment on it directly. "That's where you got the scar?" she asked instead, gesturing to her own face in the approximate location of his mark. Nathaniel nodded. "Confederate saber, Gettysburg. Damn near took my head off." "You were lucky." "Didn't feel like luck at the time." He straightened up from the doorframe. "You know how to shoot, Rebecca?" The question seemed to surprise her. "A little. My father had a rifle. He taught me the basics before..." Nathaniel finished for her when she trailed off. "Well, out here everyone should know how to handle a firearm proper. Never know when you might need it." "Are you offering to teach me?" A hint of amusement colored her voice. "Offering to finish what your father started," Nathaniel replied. "If you're interested." Rebecca considered this, then nodded decisively. "I am. Very interested." "Good. We'll start tomorrow if you're feeling up to it." He gestured toward the house. "Come on, I'll show you where the gardening tools are kept. Though I warn you that soil's stubborn as a mule. Not much grows without a fight." "I'm used to fighting for what I want," Rebecca said, falling into step beside him. "And I've always found that the things that grow in the harshest conditions are often the strongest." Nathaniel glanced at her, noting the determined set of her jaw, the straight line of her shoulders despite her still-healing injuries. Yes, she would know about surviving in harsh conditions. "Can't argue with that," he said softly. The days fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for chores, Nathaniel tending to the livestock, while Rebecca worked in the garden or helped with repairs around the ranch. Afternoons, when the desert heat was at its peak, they retreated to the shade of the house where Rebecca revealed a talent for cooking that transformed Nathaniel's simple provisions into meals with actual flavor. In the cooler evenings, Nathaniel taught Rebecca to shoot. She proved a quick study, her hands steady and her eye keen. Soon she was hitting targets at distances that impressed even Nathaniel, who had seen some of the best marksmen in the Union Army. "Your father taught you well," he commented one evening as they walked back from the makeshift shooting range he'd set up behind the barn. Rebecca shook her head. "I barely remember those lessons. This is all you." Nathaniel found himself absurdly pleased by the compliment, though he tried not to show it. "You're a natural, that's all. Some folks just have the knack." As they neared the house, Rebecca paused, looking up at the darkening sky. The first stars had begun to appear pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. "My mother used to say that when we die we become stars," she said softly. "That every point of light up there is someone watching over those they left behind." Nathaniel followed her gaze upward. "Sarah, my wife, she had a similar thought. Said the stars were God's way of keeping an eye on us." "Do you believe that?" Nathaniel considered the question. "Don't know what I believe anymore. Seen too much that don't make sense in any world with a watchful God." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her silence. After a moment, She spoke again. "Did you have children with your wife? A son, James?" Nathaniel's voice grew quieter. "He lives in Boston now. Hasn't spoken to me in nearly 10 years. May I ask why?" Nathaniel sighed, the weight of old regrets pressing down on him. "He found out some things about my service after the war. Things I'm not proud of. Things no son should know about his father." Rebecca studied his profile in the fading light. "The frontier issues you mentioned." "Yes." She didn't press for details, and Nathaniel was grateful. They stood in companionable silence for a while longer, watching as more stars emerged in the vast canvas above them. "We should go in," Nathaniel finally said. "Morning comes early, and those cattle won't feed themselves." As they turned toward the house, the sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the evening stillness. Nathaniel's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, and he stepped slightly in front of Rebecca. "Stay behind me," he murmured, eyes fixed on the road leading to his property. 3 riders appeared silhouetted against the last glow of sunset. They approached at a leisurely pace, confident and unhurried. As they drew closer, Nathaniel could make out more details: expensive clothes, well-maintained, weapons, horses that cost more than most men made in a year. City men. The kind who usually had no business out in these parts. The lead rider raised a hand in greeting as they neared the house. "Evening, friend," he called out, his voice carrying an Eastern accent, smoothed by what sounded like years in the West. "Hope we're not intruding." Nathaniel didn't return the greeting. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The 3 men stopped about 20 feet away, their horses stamping restlessly in the dirt. The leader, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and a black hat adorned with a silver band, smiled thinly. "I certainly hope so," he said. "My name is Wesley Harrington. I own an establishment in Tombstone. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Nathaniel felt Rebecca tense behind him. He kept his expression neutral, his hand still near his weapon. "Don't know what you're talking about, mister," he said evenly. "Ain't been to Tombstone in years." Harrington's smile didn't waver. "Come now, Mr. Redgrave." "Mr. Redgrave. We both know that's not entirely true." His eyes shifted to Rebecca, who was partially visible behind Nathaniel's shoulder. "Hello, Rebecca. You've led us on quite a chase." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Nathaniel said, his voice hardening. "Least of all you." Harrington sighed dramatically. "I'm afraid the law disagrees. She's property Mr. Redgrave, purchased legally and at considerable expense. And then there's the matter of a valuable customer she killed before fleeing." "Self-defense," Rebecca said, stepping out from behind Nathaniel, despite his attempt to keep her shielded. "He was going to kill me." "A tragic misunderstanding, I'm sure," Harrington replied smoothly. "But the fact remains you can't simply kill a man and walk away. Especially not a man of Mr. Fallon's connections." Nathaniel felt a cold certainty settle in his gut. This wasn't just about a runaway girl or even a dead customer. There was something more at stake. "What connections would those be?" he asked carefully. Harrington's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing Nathaniel with new interest. "Mr. Fallon had many friends in high places. Friends who are most eager to have a conversation with the woman who ended his life." "She's not going anywhere with you," Nathaniel stated flatly. The 2 men flanking Harrington shifted in their saddles, hands moving subtly closer to their weapons. Harrington himself remained relaxed, confident. "I admire your chivalry, Mr. Redgrave, misplaced though it may be. But this isn't a negotiation. Rebecca comes with us now, or things will become unpleasant." Nathaniel felt the familiar calm of impending violence settle over him. It was a state he'd known well, once a detached clarity, where everything slowed down and options presented themselves with crystal precision. 3 against 1, he observed. Not great odds for you boys. One of Harrington's men snorted derisively. Old man's got a sense of humor. Harrington's smile tightened. You're not a young man anymore, Mr. Redgrave. Whatever you were in your prime those days are behind you. Why risk your life for a whore who killed a paying customer? Nathaniel's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. I suggest you turn around and ride out the way you came. The girl stays here. A tense silence stretched between them. Nathaniel could feel Rebecca's presence just behind his right shoulder, her breathing quick but controlled. Harrington studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Very well, Mr. Redgrave. We'll leave, for now. He tipped his hat mockingly. But this conversation isn't over. Rebecca knows things about my business and my associates that make her far more valuable than just another pretty face. She will come back to Tombstone one way or another. With that, Harrington wheeled his horse around, his men following suit. They rode away at the same unhurried pace they'd arrived with, as if they had all the time in the world. Nathaniel watched until they disappeared into the gathering darkness before turning to Rebecca. Her face was pale, but her expression was resolute. They'll be back, she said quietly. I know. Nathaniel gazed out at the empty road. And next time, they won't be talking. Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking vulnerable despite her brave front. I've brought trouble to your door. I should leave. And go where? Nathaniel shook his head. No, you're safer here than anywhere else right now. Why are you doing this? She asked, searching his face. Why risk yourself for me? Nathaniel couldn't tell her the real reason, that in protecting her he was trying to atone for failing to protect others like her long ago. That every time he looked at her, he saw the ghosts of a burning village and heard the echoes of screams he'd done nothing to silence. Because it's the right thing to do, he said instead. And because I've spent too many years doing the wrong thing to pass up a chance to do right. Rebecca held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Thank you. Nathaniel turned back toward the house. Come on, we'd best get inside. Tomorrow we'll need to prepare. For what? For when they come back. His voice was grim. And they will come back. The attack came 3 nights later, long after midnight, when the desert had cooled, and the only sounds were the distant yips of coyotes. Nathaniel, who had taken to sleeping lightly in the main room of the house, was awakened by the smell of smoke before he heard anything. He was on his feet, instantly grabbing his rifle from beside the door as he moved to the window. In the moonlight, he could see flames beginning to lick up the side of his barn bright orange against the dark wood. Rebecca, he called, already moving toward her room. Fire. She emerged before he reached her door, fully dressed. She'd taken to sleeping in her clothes since Harrington's visit, ready to move at a moment's notice. The barn, she asked, instantly alert. Nathaniel nodded. Stay inside. No, she cut him off. I'm helping. The horses. There was no time to argue. Nathaniel handed her his revolver. Take this. Stay sharp. They burst out of the house together, the heat of the growing fire immediately apparent. The barn was already half engulfed, the dry wood catching quickly. In the distance, Nathaniel caught a glimpse of riders retreating into the night, their laughter carried back on the wind. The horses first, Nathaniel directed, heading for the barn door. Inside, the smoke was thick, and the frightened whinnies of the trapped animals echoed above the crackling of flames. Nathaniel moved quickly to the stalls, throwing open gates and slapping rumps to drive the panicked horses toward the exit. Rebecca was right behind him, her bandana pulled up over her nose and mouth against the smoke. They managed to free all 4 horses, driving them out into the corral, away from the burning structure. As they turned to leave the barn themselves, a burning beam crashed down just ahead of them, sending up a shower of sparks. Nathaniel pushed Rebecca back, looking for another way out. The heat was intense now, making it hard to breathe or think clearly. Through the smoke, he spotted a gap in the wall where boards had warped apart. "There," he pointed. "Can you fit through?" Rebecca nodded, already moving toward it. She squeezed through the opening with some difficulty, the rough edges of the boards tearing at her clothes. Once outside, she turned back. "Come on!" she shouted over the roar of the fire. Nathaniel tried to follow, but the gap was narrower than he'd thought, and his broader shoulders wouldn't pass through. The smoke was getting thicker, making him cough violently. "Go!" he shouted to Rebecca. "Get clear!" Instead, she disappeared from view. Nathaniel cursed, turning back to look for another exit. The main door was now completely blocked by flames. The roof was beginning to groan ominously above him. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, and a section of wall near him gave way. Rebecca stood there, an axe in her hands, having chopped through the weathered boards from the outside. "Move!" she yelled. Nathaniel didn't need to be told twice. He squeezed through the newly created opening, feeling the heat of the flames licking at his back. As he tumbled out into the relatively cooler air outside, a searing pain shot through his right shoulder. He reached up to find a piece of burning wood had embedded itself in his flesh. Rebecca was there immediately, helping him to his feet and pulling him away from the collapsing structure. They watched from a safe distance as the barn succumbed to the flames, the roof falling in with a thunderous crash that sent sparks spiraling up into the night sky. "Your shoulder," Rebecca said, noticing his injury. "Sit down. Let me look at it." Nathaniel allowed her to guide him to a wooden bench near the corral. The horses were still agitated, running in circles and snorting at the fire, but at least they were safe. Rebecca examined the wound by the light of the burning barn, her touch gentle but efficient. "The wood went in deep. This is going to hurt when I pull it out." "Just do it," Nathaniel grunted. She braced one hand against his shoulder and gripped the protruding splinter with the other. "Ready, on 3. 1. She yanked it out in one swift motion. Nathaniel hissed through clenched teeth, but made no other sound. Blood immediately began to seep through his shirt. "We need to get this cleaned and bandaged," Rebecca said. "Can you make it to the house?" He nodded, and together they made their way back to the main building. Inside, Rebecca set to work with practiced hands, cleaning the wound with whiskey, which made Nathaniel swear colorfully, and then applying a poultice of herbs she'd gathered from his garden. "My mother taught me," she explained as she worked. "Medicine was her gift." "It seems like you inherited it," Nathaniel observed, wincing as she bound the wound with clean strips of cloth. "Among other things." Her voice was distant, lost in memory. "She taught me that healing wasn't just about mending the body. It was about restoring balance between the person and the world, between their spirit and their flesh." "Sounds like wisdom to me." Rebecca tied off the bandage and sat back, studying her handiwork. "There. It's not too deep, but watch for signs of corruption. Fever, increased pain, red streaks." Nathaniel nodded, then looked toward the window where the glow of the burning barn was still visible. "They'll be back. Next time it won't be the barn." "I know," Rebecca said quietly. "This is because of me. Because of what I know." "And what is that exactly?" Nathaniel asked. "What makes you so valuable to Harrington that he'd go to these lengths?" Rebecca hesitated, uncertainty crossing her face. I'm not sure you want to be involved in this, Nathaniel. It goes beyond just me killing Fallon in self-defense. There are powerful people involved. I'm already involved, he pointed out. My barn's on fire. She acknowledged this with a grim smile. Fair point. She took a deep breath. Fallon wasn't just a customer. He worked for people who have interests in this territory, mining interests mostly. Silver Creek Mining Company. They're trying to build a railroad through Apache land that's supposed to be protected by treaty. Nathaniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with his injury. And what's your connection to all this? Rebecca's eyes met his, steady and clear. The land they want includes what used to be my village, the one that was destroyed 17 years ago. She paused. I overheard Fallon talking to another man while he was with me. They mentioned finding a document, a map showing a rich silver deposit on that land. They needed to eliminate anyone who might remember the old settlement or have claim to it. The pieces were falling into place now, forming a picture Nathaniel had dreaded seeing. He'd suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed made the old guilt surge anew. So they're worried you might have knowledge that could interfere with their plans, he summarized. Rebecca nodded. Or that I might find others who survived. There weren't many, but she trailed off, pain evident in her expression. Nathaniel knew he should tell her the truth, that he had been there, that he had played a role in the destruction of her village. But the words stuck in his throat. Not now, he told himself. Not when she was already dealing with so much. Not when she needed him to be strong. We'll figure this out, he promised instead. But first, we need to get through the night. Get some rest if you can. I'll keep watch. Rebecca looked like she wanted to object, but exhaustion was written plainly on her face. She nodded reluctantly. Wake me in a few hours. You need rest too, especially with that wound. After she had gone to her room, Nathaniel sat by the window rifle across his lap, watching the last of the barn burn down to embers. The night was quiet again, but it was a deceptive peace. The attack on the barn had been a message, a demonstration of what would come next if they didn't comply. Nathaniel had seen such tactics before. He'd even employed them himself in another life. But this time, he was on the receiving end. This time he was protecting, not destroying. And despite the danger, despite the pain in his shoulder and the loss of his barn, there was a strange sense of rightness to it all, as if the wheel had turned full circle, giving him a chance to balance accounts long overdue. Whether that chance would end in redemption or ruin remained to be seen. Dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the barn, the rising sun casting long shadows across the ranch. Nathaniel, who had dozed intermittently through the latter part of the night, was already outside assessing the damage when he heard the approach of a single horse. His rifle was in his hands, instantly trained on the road. But as the rider came into view, he lowered the weapon with a grunt of recognition. "Bit early for social calls, isn't it, Daniel?" he called out. Sheriff Daniel Blackwood reined his horse to a stop, taking in the destroyed barn with a practiced eye. At 59, Blackwood was lean and weathered, with a salt-and-pepper beard, and the watchful gaze of a man who'd seen too much to be easily surprised. "Heard there was some excitement out your way last night," Blackwood replied, dismounting with the fluid ease of a lifelong horseman. "Figured I'd come see for myself. News travels fast. And it does when 3 men ride into the Silver Dollar at 2 in the morning, bragging about teaching an old man a lesson." Blackwood spat into the dirt. "Harrington's boys aren't known for their discretion." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "So you know who did this?" "I know," Blackwood confirmed. "Question is, why last I checked you weren't in the habit of making enemies these days?" Before Nathaniel could respond, The door to the house opened, and Rebecca stepped out. She was dressed in the same clothes as the night before, her hair pulled back in a simple braid. She approached cautiously, eyeing the newcomer with undisguised suspicion. Blackwood removed his hat, revealing thinning gray hair. "Ma'am?" He greeted her with a slight nod. "Sheriff," she replied, having noticed the star pinned to his vest. "Rebecca, this is Sheriff Daniel Blackwood." Nathaniel introduced them. "Daniel, this is Rebecca Quinn. She's been staying with me while recovering from some injuries." Blackwood's eyes took in Rebecca's still healing bruises, the cautious way she held herself, and the wariness in her gaze. Understanding dawned in his expression. "Miss Quinn," he said with unexpected gentleness. "I believe I've heard your name mentioned around Tombstone recently. Something about an incident at the Red House." Rebecca stiffened. "Is that why you're here, to arrest me?" "No, ma'am." Blackwood shook his head. "Tombstone's not in my jurisdiction, for one thing. For another, I've got no interest in dragging anyone back to Wesley Harrington's establishment. Man's a stain on humanity, far as I'm concerned." Some of the tension left Rebecca's shoulders, though she remained wary. "Then why are you here?" "Like I told Nathaniel, I heard about the fire. Came to check that everything was all right." His gaze shifted between them. "Though it seems there's more to the story than just a barn burning." Nathaniel exchanged a look with Rebecca, silently asking permission. She gave a slight nod. "Let's talk inside," Nathaniel suggested. "It's a long story, and I could use some coffee." Blackwood followed them into the house. As they passed through the doorway, he placed a hand on Nathaniel's uninjured shoulder, stopping him briefly. "This have anything to do with Gila River?" he asked quietly, his voice too low for Rebecca to hear ahead of them. Nathaniel's expression hardened. "Everything," he replied, equally quiet. "Everything and nothing." Blackwood's eyes held his for a moment longer, something like resignation passing between them. Then he nodded once, releasing Nathaniel's shoulder. "Figured as much," he said. "Past has a way of circling back around, doesn't it?" "Like a vulture," Nathaniel agreed grimly. "Never quite done feeding." Inside, Rebecca had already set water to boil for coffee. The three of them sat around Nathaniel's scarred pine table, the morning light streaming through the windows, creating pools of gold on the worn wood. Nathaniel let Rebecca tell her story, filling in only when necessary. Blackwood listened without interruption, his expression giving little away. When she finished, he sat back in his chair, absently, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. "Maxwell Fallon," he finally said, tasting the name like something bitter. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear he's dead. Man was a snake." "You knew him?" Rebecca asked. Blackwood's eyes flicked briefly to Nathaniel before returning to Rebecca. "We served together, during and after the war." "You were both under Nathaniel's command," Rebecca stated, surprising both men. At their looks, she shrugged slightly. "I've pieced things together from comments, reactions. I'm observant." "Yes," Blackwood acknowledged. "We were part of a special unit tasked with, well, the official term was pacification of hostile elements along the frontier." "You mean killing Indians and anyone who lived with them," Rebecca said flatly. Blackwood didn't flinch from her accusation. "Yes, that's exactly what I mean." A heavy silence fell over the table. Nathaniel stared into his coffee, unable to meet Rebecca's eyes. This was the moment he'd been dreading, the moment when the past and present collided, when the thin veneer of his new life was stripped away to reveal the man he had been. "Were you there?" Rebecca finally asked, her voice quiet but intense. "When my village was destroyed, were either of you there?" Blackwood looked to Nathaniel clearly, leaving the answer to him. Nathaniel raised his head slowly, forcing himself to meet Rebecca's gaze directly. Daniel wasn't, he said, his voice rough. He'd been reassigned by then, but I was. The words hung in the air between them, irretrievable. Rebecca's face went completely still, her eyes never leaving his. I know, she said simply. It was Nathaniel's turn to be shocked. You know? Rebecca nodded slowly. I recognized you the moment I was lucid enough to really see your face. You were the officer in charge, the one who pulled me from the burning house and handed me to that settler family. The one who looked at me with such regret. Nathaniel felt as though the ground had dropped away beneath him. All this time, she had known. All this time, she had been watching him, judging him, perhaps even hating him, and he hadn't realized. Why didn't you say something? He asked hoarsely. What would have been the point? Rebecca countered. At first, I was too weak to confront you. Then, as I recovered, I wanted to understand why you had saved me then and why you were helping me now. I needed to know who you really were, the man who led that attack, or the man who pulled a child from the flames. Blackwood cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. Not to interrupt, but we have more immediate concerns. Harrington won't stop with burning a barn. If what Rebecca overheard is true, Silver Creek Mining has too much at stake to let this go. Nathaniel seized on the change of subject, grateful for the reprieve. What do you know about their operation, Daniel? Not as much as I'd like, Blackwood admitted. They've got backing from some powerful people back east. They've been buying up land all through the territory, focusing especially on areas near the old Apache settlements. Like my village? Rebecca interjected. Blackwood nodded. Exactly. Word is they found silver deposits richer than anything at Tombstone. They've been quietly eliminating anyone with competing claims or knowledge that might interfere with their plans. And Fallon worked for them, Nathaniel stated. As muscle, yes. He was their cleaner, you might say. Blackwood's expression darkened. Man always did enjoy his work too much. Rebecca leaned forward. So what do we do now? They know I'm here. They'll come back. You could come to town with me, Blackwood offered. I can provide protection, at least officially. And unofficially? Nathaniel asked, knowing his old comrade too well to trust the suggestion at face value. Blackwood sighed. Unofficially, I'm one man with limited resources. Silver Creek has money influence and plenty of guns for hire. I'd do my best, but I can't promise it would be enough. Then we stay here, Nathaniel decided. At least here we have some control over the terrain, know the approaches. It's your funeral, Blackwood said, though there was no judgment in his tone. But before you commit to this course, there's something else you should know. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded piece of paper. This came for you yesterday. I thought it might be important enough to deliver personally. Nathaniel took the paper, unfolding it to reveal a telegram. As he read the brief message, his face paled slightly. What is it? Rebecca asked, concern evident in her voice. Nathaniel passed her the telegram wordlessly. She read it aloud. Father, stop received your letters. Stop, Elena gave birth to son. Stop named him Nathaniel. Stop coming to visit. End of month. Stop James. Your son, Rebecca said softly. He's coming here. Nathaniel nodded, still processing the news. With his wife and my grandson. The word felt strange on his tongue, almost foreign. When did you send letters? Rebecca asked, confusion evident. You said you hadn't spoken to him in years. Nathaniel glanced at Blackwood, who was studiously examining the grain of the table, giving them what privacy he could. I wrote to him every month since his mother died, Nathaniel explained. But I never sent them. I gave the latest one to Daniel about a week ago, asked him to forward it for me. And now he's coming here, Rebecca concluded, into the middle of all this. The implication hung heavily in the air. James and his family would be arriving just as things with Harrington and Silver Creek mining were reaching a critical point. They would be walking into danger they knew nothing about. I need to warn him, Nathaniel said. Tell him to delay the visit. Telegraph office in town can send a message, Blackwood offered. But it might not reach him in time if he's already on his way. Nathaniel rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 62 years. One way or another, I need to end this before they arrive. I won't have my son and his family put at risk because of my past. Our past, Blackwood corrected gently. We all made choices back then, Nat. Some worse than others, but none of us came out with clean hands. Rebecca studied both men, her expression thoughtful. You've both been trying to atone, haven't you, in your own ways? Blackwood shrugged. Trying to balance the scales a bit. Not sure it's possible, but seems worth the effort. And now, she pressed. When Harrington and his employers come back, what then? Then we fight, Nathaniel said simply. Not just for you or for me, but for the truth. People should know what Silver Creek Mining is really doing and who they're willing to hurt to get what they want. Blackwood nodded slowly. I'm with you, whatever that's worth. It's worth a lot, Nathaniel assured him. Just like old times. God help us, Blackwood muttered, but there was a hint of a smile beneath his beard. Rebecca looked between the two old soldiers, these men who had once been part of destroying her world and were now pledging to defend her. The irony wasn't lost on her. You realize, she said quietly, that by helping me, you're fighting against the very interests you once served. The same forces that ordered the destruction of my village are behind Silver Creek Mining now. We know, Nathaniel confirmed, meeting her gaze steadily. That's part of why it matters. For the first time since she'd recognized Nathaniel, Rebecca smiled at him, a small, cautious thing, but genuine nonetheless. Then I guess we have work to do, she said. Outside, the sun had fully risen, bathing the desert in harsh, unforgiving light. The charred skeleton of the barn stood as a stark reminder of what they faced. But within the simple ranch house, something new had begun to take root, an alliance born of shared wounds and common purpose. A fragile trust growing in the most unlikely of soils. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The day after Blackwood's visit dawned clear and merciless, the Arizona sun already scorching by mid-morning. Nathaniel stood amidst the charred remains of his barn, sifting through the debris in search of anything salvageable. There wasn't much, a few metal tools, some tack that had been stored in a trunk that had partially protected its contents, the blackened skeleton of his workbench. The loss of the structure itself was a blow, but not a crippling one. He could rebuild, given time. The real message was in the act itself, a declaration of intent, a promise of escalation to come. Rebecca approached from the house, carrying a canteen of water. She'd tied her hair back with a strip of leather and wore one of Nathaniel's old shirts over her dress. The sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The clothes hung loose on her frame, but there was a newfound strength in her movements, a steadiness that hadn't been there when he'd first found her in the desert. Here, she said, offering him the canteen. You've been out in this heat for hours. Nathaniel accepted it gratefully, taking a long drink before handing it back. Thank you. Rebecca surveyed the destruction, her expression solemn. How bad is it? Could be worse? Nathaniel replied with a shrug. Main supports are still standing on the north side, something to build from at least. You're planning to rebuild, even knowing they might come back and burn it down again? A ghost of a smile touched Nathaniel's lips. would be letting them win otherwise, wouldn't it? Rebecca studied him for a moment, then nodded. I suppose it would. She knelt beside him, picking up a charred piece of wood and turning it over in her hands. I can help. I've built things before. Your settlement, Nathaniel said quietly. You helped build it. Yes. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened around the blackened wood. My father believed everyone should contribute regardless of age or gender. I learned to handle tools before I was 10. Nathaniel watched her the way her eyes remained fixed on the burned timber in her hands, avoiding his gaze. Since yesterday's revelation that she had recognized him all along, things had shifted between them. Not dramatically, but noticeably. A new wariness in her manner, a careful distance in her words. Rebecca, he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say, only knowing that the silence between them needed breaking. She looked up then, her dark eyes meeting his directly. You want to know why I stayed, once I knew who you were? It wasn't a question, but Nathaniel nodded anyway. Rebecca set the piece of wood aside and brushed the soot from her hands. At first I was too weak to leave. Then, as I regained my strength, I found myself curious. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The man who led that attack, and the man who pulled me from the flames, they seemed like different people. I wanted to know which one was real. And now, Nathaniel asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Now I think perhaps they both were. She held his gaze steadily. The question is, which one are you now? The directness of her question caught him off guard. For most of his life, Nathaniel had avoided such introspection, preferring action to reflection. But Rebecca deserved an honest answer. I've been trying to figure that out for 17 years, he admitted. Still don't know for certain. Rebecca nodded, as if his answer confirmed something she'd already suspected. That's why I stayed. Because you're still looking for redemption, even if you don't call it that. Before Nathaniel could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Both tensed instinctively, but it was only Blackwood returning this time with a wagon in tow. Thought you might need some supplies, the sheriff called as he pulled up near the house. Lumber, nails, tools. Not much, but it's a start. Nathaniel straightened, surprise evident on his face. Wasn't expecting this. Blackwood climbed down from the wagon with a grunt. Figure we need to fortify this place if you're determined to make a stand here. Might as well start with rebuilding what they took. The simple act of solidarity touched Nathaniel more than he cared to admit. He and Blackwood had a complicated history, comrades in arms, witnesses to each other's worst moments, keepers of shared secrets. But true friendship had always seemed beyond reach, tainted by the blood on both their hands. Perhaps that was changing now. I appreciate it, Daniel, Nathaniel said gruffly. Blackwood waved off his thanks. Least I could do. Besides, I brought something else you might find interesting. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. Had a friend at the land office do some digging. This is a copy of the original treaty that established the boundaries of the Apache reservation, including the area where Rebecca's settlement was located. Rebecca stepped forward, her interest piqued. May I see that? Blackwood handed her the document, and she unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the legal text and accompanying map. This shows the original boundaries, she said, tracing a line with her finger. The settlement was here near this bend in the river. Nathaniel moved to look over her shoulder, careful to maintain a respectful distance. That's government land now, according to more recent maps. Exactly, Blackwood confirmed. After the incident, he glanced apologetically at Rebecca. The boundaries were redrawn. The official story was that the land had been abandoned following Apache raids. A convenient lie, Rebecca said bitterly. Our settlement was peaceful, There hadn't been raids in that area for years. Which raises the question, Nathaniel added, why that particular settlement needed to be eliminated. What made that land so valuable? Blackwood's expression turned grim. I think we all know the answer to that now. Silver. But they needed to be sure all legitimate claims were gone, all witnesses eliminated. And 17 years later, they're still tying up loose ends, Rebecca concluded, looking up from the map. And anyone else who might remember the truth. A heavy silence fell over the three of them as the full implications sank in. This wasn't just about Rebecca killing Fallon in self-defense. It was about a conspiracy spanning nearly 2 decades involving powerful interests willing to commit murder to protect their investment. There's something else, Blackwood said, breaking the silence. A federal judge is coming to Tucson next week. Judge William Monroe. He's known for being incorruptible, and he has the authority to review land claims and treaty violations. Hope flickered briefly in Rebecca's eyes. If we could present evidence of what really happened, of the illegal seizure of that land, we'd need more than just our word, Nathaniel cautioned. Silver Creek Mining has influence money. They'll have their own witnesses ready to swear to whatever version of events benefits them. What about physical evidence? Rebecca asked. Records, correspondence, anything that might show the real motives behind the attack. Nathaniel shook his head. Those kinds of orders were never written down. Too dangerous. Maybe not the orders themselves, Blackwood mused, but there might be other documentation. Financial records showing who profited from the land transfer surveys conducted before the attack. The map, Rebecca said suddenly. Harrington mentioned that Fallon was looking for a map showing the silver deposits. If it exists, it would prove the real motive. Nathaniel exchanged a look with Blackwood. Possible, but where would such a map be now? If Fallon was looking for it, he obviously didn't have it, Blackwood reasoned. Maybe it's still out there somewhere. Rebecca folded the treaty map carefully, her mind clearly working through possibilities. My father kept records of everything. Maps, correspondence details about the settlement. He had a strong box buried beneath the floor of our house. If it survived the fire, Nathaniel began, it might still be there, Rebecca finished. The strongbox was iron-built to withstand flames. The implications hung in the air between them. If such evidence existed, it could expose the entire conspiracy, but retrieving it would mean returning to the site of the massacre, a journey fraught with both physical and emotional peril. It's too dangerous, Nathaniel said firmly. Harrington's men are watching this place. The moment we leave, they'll follow. Not if they don't know we're gone, Blackwood countered. I could create a diversion in town, spread word that I've taken Rebecca into protective custody. Meanwhile, you two slip away to check the old settlement. Rebecca nodded, determination hardening her features. It's worth the risk. This might be our only chance to prove what really happened. Nathaniel wanted to object further, but he recognized the resolve in Rebecca's eyes. This wasn't just about justice or safety. It was about reclaiming a piece of her past, honoring the memory of those who had died. All right, he conceded reluctantly, but we do this carefully. No unnecessary risks. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Thank you. Blackwood clapped his hands together once, as if settling the matter. Good. I'll head back to town, start laying the groundwork for our little deception. You two prepare for the journey. The old settlement is, 2 days' ride from here? At least, Nathaniel confirmed. Rough country between here and there. I remember the way, Rebecca said quietly. Every step. The simplicity of her statement carried the weight of all she had lost. All the memories she had carried alone for 17 years. Nathaniel felt the familiar ache of guilt sharper now in her presence. We'll leave at first light tomorrow, he decided. Travel light, move fast. As Blackwood prepared to depart with promises to return later with more supplies and news, Rebecca moved away to begin gathering what they would need for the journey. Nathaniel caught Blackwood's arm before he could climb back onto his wagon. "Watch your back in town, Daniel," he warned in a low voice. "If Silver Creek gets wind of what we're doing—" Blackwood nodded, his expression serious. "I know. Been wearing this star long enough to know when I've painted a target on my chest." He studied Nathaniel's face for a moment. "You sure about this, Nat going back there with her?" The question carried layers of meaning. Nathaniel glanced toward Rebecca, who was now inside the house, visible through the open doorway as she moved about gathering supplies. "No," he admitted quietly. "But she needs to do this. And maybe I do too." Blackwood's weathered face creased in a sad smile. "Always figured our ghosts would catch up to us eventually. Just didn't expect it would be like this." "Me neither." Nathaniel released his friend's arm. "Be careful." "You too, old friend. You too." As Blackwood's wagon rolled away, raising a cloud of dust that hung in the still desert air, Nathaniel turned his attention back to the charred remains of his barn. There was work to be done before they could leave, securing the livestock, preparing the horses for the journey, ensuring the ranch would survive their absence. But beneath these practical concerns ran a deeper current of unease. Tomorrow he would return to the place where he had committed his gravest sin. Tomorrow he would face the full weight of his past, with the living embodiment of his failure standing beside him. It was fitting, he supposed, a reckoning long overdue. The journey began in darkness, the pre-dawn chill still clinging to the desert, as Nathaniel and Rebecca set out. They rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, the rhythmic hoofbeats of their horses, the only sound marking their passage. Nathaniel had chosen a route that avoided the main trails, winding instead through arroyos and along the bases of mesas, where they would be less visible to any watching eyes. It added time to their journey, but safety was worth the delay. As the sun rose, painting the landscape in shades of gold and orange, Nathaniel studied Rebecca's profile. She rode with the easy confidence of someone raised on horseback, her back straight, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The bruises on her face had faded to yellowish smudges, barely visible now against her copper skin. "You ride well?" he observed, breaking the long silence between them. Rebecca glanced at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "My father insisted. Said a good horse was more valuable than gold out here." "Wise man." "He was." A shadow passed over her face. "Until the end, at least." Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. "What happened at the end?" Rebecca's jaw tightened. "After the attack, after we were taken in by the settler family, he changed. Stopped preaching, stopped reading his Bible, started drinking." Her voice grew quieter. "He blamed himself for not protecting us, for not seeing the danger coming. Said God had abandoned us, or we had abandoned God. I was never sure which." "And your mother?" Nathaniel asked carefully. "Died 6 months after we left the settlement. Fever." Rebecca's expression remained composed, but there was old pain in her eyes. "She never recovered from that night. It was as if something essential had been torn from her, her home, her people, her purpose. She just faded." Nathaniel nodded, understanding all too well. He had seen it happen to others, the slow death of the spirit preceding the death of the body. It was a common enough fate for those displaced by violence. "I'm sorry," he said, knowing the inadequacy of the words even as he spoke them. Rebecca looked at him directly. Are you truly? The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Nathaniel met her gaze steadily. Yes, he said simply, for what it's worth, which ain't much, I know. But yes, I am sorry. Have been for 17 years. Rebecca studied him for a long moment, as if searching for something in his face. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her at least partially. She gave a small nod and turned her attention back to the trail ahead. They rode in silence for another hour before Rebecca spoke again. Why did you do it? She asked, her voice calm but intent. Lead that attack. You don't seem like a man who would slaughter innocents willingly. Nathaniel had been expecting the question, had been preparing for it since the moment she'd revealed she knew who he was. Yet now that it had been asked directly, he found himself struggling for an answer that wasn't just an excuse. Orders, he said finally. That's the easy answer, and it's true as far as it goes. We were told the settlement was harboring Apache warriors, that they'd been involved in raids on white settlements. He shook his head. But I knew better, or should have. The intelligence was flimsy, the urgency manufactured. I had doubts, but I pushed them aside. Why? Rebecca pressed. If you had doubts, why proceed? Nathaniel sighed heavily. Because questioning orders meant questioning everything. My purpose, my place in the world, the cause I'd fought for. He paused, remembering. And because Fallon and his kind were eager for action. If I'd refused, someone else would have led the attack, someone who wouldn't have hesitated at all. But so you told yourself you were the lesser evil, Rebecca concluded. Something like that, Nathaniel admitted. It's a poor justification, I know. It is, she agreed, but there was no heat in her words, just a weary acceptance. But I understand it. That's the terrible thing. I understand how good men can do evil things. They crested a rise, and Nathaniel reined in his horse, surveying the landscape ahead. The terrain was becoming more familiar now, memories overlaying the present like ghostly images. We'll make camp in that grove ahead, he decided, pointing to a cluster of mesquite trees in the distance. Rest through the worst of the heat. Continue at dusk. Rebecca nodded agreement, and they urged their horses forward. As they rode, Nathaniel found himself studying her again, struck by the complex mixture of strength and vulnerability she embodied. She had every reason to hate him, to want him dead. Yet, here she was, riding beside him, speaking to him with a measure of understanding he knew he didn't deserve. Why didn't you kill me? He asked suddenly. When you recognized me, you had opportunity. God knows you had cause. Rebecca looked at him, surprise evident in her expression. You think I never considered it? I think you must have. She was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. The night after I first recognized you, when you were asleep in that chair by the bed, I had your own knife in my hand. I stood over you for what felt like hours, trying to find the will to use it. Nathaniel absorbed this without shock. It was what he would have expected, what he might have done in her place. What stopped you? He asked. I realized it wouldn't change anything, Rebecca said simply. It wouldn't bring back my parents or anyone else from the settlement. It wouldn't undo what was done. She paused. And I saw that you were already punishing yourself more effectively than I ever could. The man who saved me from the desert was carrying a weight I couldn't match with my blade. Nathaniel didn't know how to respond to that. The truth of her words cut deeper than any knife could have. They reached the mesquite grove and dismounted, leading their horses into the meager shade. As Rebecca saw to the animals, Nathaniel set about making a small smokeless fire to heat coffee. The routine tasks of camp making provided a welcome respite from the weight of their conversation. Yet, as they sat together in the dappled shade sipping coffee and sharing a simple meal of jerky and hard biscuits, Nathaniel found himself wanting to continue needing to understand more about this woman who had become so unexpectedly central to his life. "After your father died," he began hesitantly, "how did you end up at the Red House?" Rebecca's expression darkened, but she answered evenly. "The settler who took us in Abram Morton, he had a fondness for whiskey and cards. Poor combination." She took a sip of her coffee. "When he ran out of money and possessions to wager, he offered me as payment to settle a debt. I was 16, as I told you before." Nathaniel's hands tightened around his tin cup. "To Harrington." "No, to a man named Garrett. He owned a different establishment in Silver City, less exclusive than the Red House." Her voice remained detached, as if she were recounting someone else's history. "I was there for 4 years before Harrington saw me and decided I'd be more profitable in his place. He paid Garrett a small fortune for me, or so he liked to remind me whenever I displeased him." The matter-of-fact way she described her own sale and purchase made Nathaniel's stomach turn. He had seen much in his life, the horrors of war, the brutality of the frontier, but the casual dehumanization in Rebecca's story struck him as a particular kind of evil. "And no one tried to help you?" "In all those years," a bitter smile touched Rebecca's lips. "Who would the law doesn't concern itself with women like me? The respectable folk prefer to pretend we don't exist. And the men who visited us," she shrugged, "they were there to use, not to save." "Until Fallon," Nathaniel said quietly. "Yes, until Fallon." Rebecca set her cup down and hugged her knees to her chest, suddenly looking younger, more vulnerable. "He wasn't even the worst, you know. Not until that last night. There were regulars who did far crueler things week after week. But something in me just broke when he pulled that knife. When he talked about carving his name into me like I was livestock to be branded." Nathaniel could picture it all too clearly. Fallon, with his cruel smile and dead eyes, the same expression he'd worn when firing into crowds of fleeing villagers. The thought of Rebecca at his mercy made Nathaniel's blood run cold. "You did what you had to," he said, echoing his words from days earlier. "No one could blame you for that." "Harrington does," Rebecca pointed out. "Silver Creek Mining does. They want me dead for it." "They want you dead because you're a loose end," Nathaniel corrected. "Because you know too much, and remember what they'd prefer stayed forgotten." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Just like the map we're seeking. If it exists, if we can find it, it's proof of what they really wanted, why they really ordered that attack." "If it exists," Nathaniel emphasized, "and if it survived." "It exists," Rebecca said with quiet certainty. "My father was meticulous about documentation. He believed that words and records were sacred evidence of existence, proof of humanity." Her expression softened with memory. "He used to say that history belongs to those who write it down." "Wise man," Nathaniel said again, meaning it. "Yes," Rebecca agreed. "Despite his flaws, despite his failures at the end, he was a good man who believed in justice." She looked directly at Nathaniel. "He would have wanted me to do this to set the record straight." Something in her expression, in the quiet dignity of her purpose, stirred something deep in Nathaniel: respect, admiration, and a fierce protectiveness that went beyond guilt or atonement. "We'll find it," he promised, "and we'll make sure the truth is known." For the first time that day, Rebecca smiled, a small, guarded thing, but genuine. "Thank you, Nathaniel." As the day wore on, they rested in the shade, conserving their strength for the journey ahead. Nathaniel took the opportunity to check and clean his weapons, a habit ingrained from years of frontier living. Rebecca watched him work, her expression thoughtful. "Will you teach me?" she asked suddenly. Nathaniel looked up from the rifle he was cleaning. "Teach you what?" "That," she nodded toward the weapon. "How to clean and maintain a firearm properly. You've shown me how to shoot, but not how to care for the weapon itself." Nathaniel considered her request. "You planning on owning a gun of your own? After everything that's happened?" "Yes." Her tone left no room for argument. "I won't be defenseless again, not ever." Nathaniel nodded, understanding perfectly. "Come here, then." Rebecca moved to sit beside him, and he began to demonstrate the process, explaining each step as he worked. She was an attentive student, her quick hands mimicking his movements with natural grace. "My father would be scandalized," she remarked with a hint of irony. "A proper Christian woman handling firearms." "Times change," Nathaniel replied. "People, too." "Yes," she agreed softly. "They do." As evening approached, they packed up their small camp and continued their journey. The landscape had begun to change subtly, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with juniper and piñon pine. The air grew cooler as they gained elevation, carrying the scent of resin and wild sage. "We're getting close," Rebecca said as twilight deepened around them. "Another few hours, maybe less." Nathaniel nodded, feeling the weight of anticipation building. Tomorrow they would reach the site of the old settlement, the place where their paths had first crossed, where fate had bound them together in blood and fire. What they would find there, and whether it would offer redemption or only deeper damnation, remained to be seen. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow with no fire to betray their presence. The moon was waxing gibbous, providing enough light to see by once their eyes adjusted to the darkness. They ate a cold supper and set up their bedrolls on opposite sides of the hollow, maintaining a respectful distance. Sleep, however, proved elusive for Nathaniel. He lay awake, staring up at the star-strewn sky, his mind cycling through memories both recent and ancient. The sound of Rebecca's restless movements across the camp told him she was similarly afflicted. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly. There was a pause before she answered. "No, too many ghosts." Nathaniel understood. The closer they got to their destination, the stronger the pull of the past became. He suspected Rebecca was reliving that terrible night, the flames, the screams, the chaos of it all. "Would it help to talk?" he offered, surprising himself with the suggestion. Another pause, longer this time, then the rustle of her bedroll as she sat up, her silhouette visible in the moonlight. "Maybe," she conceded, "though I'm not sure what there is to say that we haven't already said." Nathaniel sat up as well, reaching for his canteen. He took a sip of water before responding. "Tell me about it," he said gently. "Your settlement before that night. What was it like?" Rebecca was silent for so long that Nathaniel thought she might have decided not to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, tinged with a wistfulness that made her sound younger. "It was beautiful," she said. "Not in the way cities are beautiful with grand buildings and manicured parks. It was beautiful in its purpose, in the way people lived together." She drew her knees up to her chest, continuing, "My father came west as a missionary, but what he found changed him. The Apache he met weren't savages needing salvation. They were people with their own deep spirituality, their own wisdom. And my mother," and she showed him a different way of seeing the world. "They fell in love," Nathaniel prompted when she paused. Rebecca nodded. "Against all conventional wisdom, yes. They married, and others followed their example, other white settlers who'd come seeking a different life, Apache, who were tired of conflict and wanted peace. Our settlement grew slowly, deliberately. We built homes that combined traditions, adobe walls with wooden floors, outdoor cooking areas with cast-iron stoves. Her voice grew more animated as she spoke, painting a picture of a place that had existed in defiance of the divisions that defined the frontier. We had a school where children learned both English and Apache, a meeting house that served as church on Sundays but also hosted tribal councils, gardens where we grew traditional crops alongside new varieties. She smiled faintly. My mother's medicine garden was the pride of the settlement plants from both worlds' healing traditions that complemented each other. Nathaniel listened, trying to reconcile this vision of harmony with the chaos and destruction he had brought to it. The contrast was stark, painful. "How many lived there?" he asked. "About 60 at the end," Rebecca replied. 15 families plus a few single men who worked the communal fields or hunted for the settlement. And no trouble with either side. Rebecca sighed. There were tensions sometimes. Some of the more traditional Apache viewed us with suspicion, and certainly many white settlers considered us race traitors or worse. But we managed. We traded with both, stayed neutral in conflicts. Her voice hardened slightly. We were no threat to anyone. The unspoken accusation hung in the air between them. No threat yet destroyed nonetheless. "What do you remember of that night?" Nathaniel asked, knowing he was treading on dangerous ground, but needing to hear her perspective. Rebecca's silhouette stiffened. "Everything," she said flatly. "I remember everything." She fell silent again, and Nathaniel didn't press. He was about to suggest they try to sleep when she continued, her voice now carefully controlled. "It was just after sunset. We'd had a celebration that day, a good harvest enough to see us through the winter with some to trade. People were still gathered in the central area when the first shots came." Her hands tightened around her knees. No warning, no chance to surrender or explain. Just gunfire, and then the screaming started. Nathaniel closed his eyes, remembering. The orders had been clear: no survivors, no witnesses. A cleansing, they'd called it, as if what they were doing was somehow righteous. My father tried to reach the meeting house to get people inside where it might be safer. He was shot in the street. Rebecca's voice remained steady, but Nathaniel could hear the cost of that control. My mother grabbed me and ran for our house. She hid me in the root cellar beneath the floor next to my father's strongbox. "Don't make a sound," she told me. "Whatever happens, whatever you hear, stay hidden." She took a deep breath. I heard them break in. Heard my mother pleading not for herself, but for the others. Then a shot, and silence. After that, the smell of smoke. The house was burning. Nathaniel remembered entering that house, remembered seeing the woman's body on the floor. He'd been about to leave when he'd heard something, a small sound, barely audible, over the crackling of flames. Against orders, against all reason, he'd searched and found the hidden cellar door. "I was terrified," Rebecca continued. "Smoke was coming through the floorboards, and I knew I was going to die there. Then the door opened, and there you were, in your uniform with that scar still fresh on your face. You looked haunted, like you'd seen your own soul and found it wanting." The accuracy of her description was unsettling. Nathaniel had indeed felt his humanity slipping away in that moment, felt himself becoming something he had never wanted to be. "You didn't say anything," Rebecca recalled. "You just reached down and pulled me out, carried me through the flames and out into the night. I remember looking back, seeing my home burning, seeing the bodies in the street." Her voice finally broke, and she stopped struggling to regain composure. "I'm sorry." Nathaniel said the words entirely inadequate. "I know it means nothing now, but I am truly sorry." Rebecca was quiet for a long moment before responding. "It doesn't change what happened, but it matters that you say it, that you mean it." They sat in silence after that, each lost in their own memories of that night. Eventually, Rebecca lay back down, turning away from him. "We should try to sleep," she said, her voice muffled. "Tomorrow will be difficult enough, without exhaustion added to it." Nathaniel murmured agreement and settled back onto his bedroll. But sleep remained elusive, chased away by the ghosts Rebecca had summoned with her words. In the darkness, he could almost smell the smoke again, hear the screams, feel the weight of the child in his arms as he carried her away from the inferno. One life saved when dozens had been lost. It wasn't redemption, not even close. But it was something. A small act of defiance against the horror he had helped create. And now, years later, that same life had circled back to his offering a second chance at doing right, where once he had done terrible wrong. The irony wasn't lost on him, nor was the fragile opportunity it represented. Dawn found them already on the move, having risen before first light to continue their journey. The terrain grew increasingly familiar to both of them, though in vastly different ways. For Rebecca, it was the landscape of childhood, of belonging. For Nathaniel, it was the site of his greatest shame. They crested a ridge just as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, and Rebecca reined her horse to a stop. Below them, in a shallow valley alongside a now dry riverbed, lay the remains of the settlement. From this distance, it looked like little more than scattered stones, and the occasional blackened timber protruding from the earth nature had reclaimed much in the intervening years. "It's smaller than I remembered," Rebecca said quietly. Nathaniel nodded. Places from memory often were especially those seen through a child's eyes. They sat their horses in silence for a long moment, each preparing in their own way for what lay ahead. "We should approach carefully," Nathaniel finally said. "If Silver Creek has any interest in this place, they might have someone watching it." Rebecca agreed, and they took a circuitous route down into the valley, using the sparse tree cover to mask their approach. As they drew closer, the true extent of the destruction became more apparent. What had once been homes, gardens, and community spaces was now little more than rubble. A few stone foundations remained intact, and here and there, the charred skeleton of a wall still stood, but most of the settlement had been reduced to scattered debris, half buried by years of wind-blown dust. Rebecca dismounted at what appeared to have been the edge of the settlement, her movements stiff as if she were bracing against physical pain. Nathaniel hung back, giving her space to process the reality before them. She walked slowly into the ruins, her steps hesitant at first, then more purposeful as she began to recognize landmarks. Nathaniel followed at a distance, leading both horses, his eyes constantly scanning the surroundings for any sign of danger. "This was the main street," Rebecca said, her voice carrying in the morning stillness. "The meeting house was there, where that chimney still stands." Nathaniel nodded, though she wasn't looking at him. The layout was coming back to him now, the way they had surrounded the settlement, the positions from which they had opened fire. He pushed those memories aside, focusing instead on their purpose here. "Where was your home?" he asked. Rebecca pointed to an area near what must have been the center of the settlement. "There, just past what was once the communal garden." They made their way carefully through the ruins, Rebecca occasionally pausing to touch a fragment of wall or pick up a small object from the ground. A piece of pottery, a rusted metal tool, tangible connections to the life that had once thrived here. When they reached the site of her childhood home, Rebecca stopped, her expression unreadable. Not much remained, a partial stone foundation, the collapsed remnants of an adobe wall, a scatter of domestic items too damaged by fire and weather to be worth salvaging. "The root cellar was here," she said, moving to a specific spot and kneeling, "under the main room of the house." Nathaniel tied the horses to a nearby juniper tree and joined her. Together, they began clearing away the debris and dirt that had accumulated over the years. It was slow work, the sun climbing higher as they labored, but neither suggested taking a break. After nearly 2 hours, their efforts revealed the outlines of what had indeed been a cellar door, a wooden hatch, now mostly rotted away, set into a stone-lined pit. Rebecca's movements became more urgent as they uncovered it, her hands working frantically to clear the last of the debris. "It's still here," she breathed, a note of wonder in her voice. "After all this time." The hatch itself fell apart when they tried to lift it, but the space beneath was intact, a small cellar, perhaps 6 feet square, dug into the earth and lined with stone. The roof had partially collapsed, filling much of the space with soil and debris, but it was still recognizable as the hiding place that had saved Rebecca's life. She climbed down carefully, Nathaniel following. The space was cramped, forcing them to crouch. Rebecca moved immediately to one corner, brushing away dirt, to reveal what appeared to be a metal box about the size of a large book embedded in the stone wall. "The strong box," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "It's still here." The box was secured with a simple latch rather than a lock. Years of exposure had corroded the metal, but after some effort, Rebecca managed to open it. Inside, protected from the elements by the tight seal of the box, were several items: a small leather-bound journal, a folded document that appeared to be a deed or certificate, and most importantly, a carefully drawn map on oilskin. Rebecca handled each item with reverence, but it was the map that captured her full attention. She unfolded it carefully, spreading it on a relatively flat piece of fallen timber. Nathaniel moved closer, peering over her shoulder. The map showed the region in detailed topography, with the settlement clearly marked. But what caught Nathaniel's eye were the notations along the nearby hills and valleys, symbols and numbers that could only represent mineral deposits. "Silver," Rebecca confirmed, tracing a heavily marked area with her finger. "And here and here. The whole valley is rich with it." She looked up at Nathaniel. "This is what they wanted. This is why our people had to die." The bitterness in her voice was palpable, but beneath it was something else: vindication. The proof she had sought was literally in her hands. Nathaniel studied the map more closely. "These markings, they are dated 5 months before the attack. Someone knew about the silver well in advance." "My father," Rebecca said, turning to the journal. She opened it carefully, the brittle pages threatening to crumble at her touch. "He was trained as a geologist before he became a minister. That's how he chose the location for the settlement. He knew the land would be fertile, with good access to water." She leafed through the journal, scanning entries. "Here, 6 months before the attack. He discovered the silver while expanding the irrigation system for the gardens. He debated whether to report it, fearing what it might mean for the settlement." Nathaniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air of the cellar. If he reported it officially, it would have triggered a rush, Rebecca finished. "Our land would have been overrun, our community destroyed by prospectors." She turned another page. "He decided to keep it secret, at least until he could secure legal recognition for our settlement and ensure the Apache members had protected status." She continued reading, her expression growing more troubled. "But someone found out. A government surveyor visited, asking questions about the land, the river flow. Father suspected he was looking for something specific." She looked up at Nathaniel. "The last entry is just a week before the attack. It says Fallon came again today. His questions are no longer disguised as friendly interest. I fear what his masters intend." Fallon, Nathaniel repeated the pieces falling into place. He was scouting for them, gathering intelligence. That's why he was so eager when the orders came down. Rebecca closed the journal carefully. And 17 years later, he was still working for them, still eliminating threats to their claim. Her voice hardened. Still hurting people for profit. Nathaniel nodded grimly. The same people who ordered the attack must be behind Silver Creek Mining now. They've been playing a long game waiting until the memory of what happened here faded before beginning full-scale operations. But I remembered, Rebecca said quietly, and now we have proof. She gathered the items from the strongbox, wrapping them carefully in a spare bandana before tucking them into her saddlebag. As they climbed out of the cellar, Nathaniel kept a wary eye on their surroundings. They had been focused on their search, perhaps too focused. Anyone watching could have approached while they were underground. But the ruins remained still and silent, with only the whisper of wind through the juniper trees to break the quiet. Still, Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being observed. "We should move on," he said in a low voice. "We've found what we came for." Rebecca nodded, but her gaze lingered on the ruins of her childhood home. "Just give me a moment." She walked slowly through what had once been the main room of the house, stopping at a particular spot. Nathaniel realized it must be where her mother had fallen. Rebecca knelt, touching the earth gently, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a private farewell. When she rose, her face was composed, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I'm ready now." They mounted their horses and began the journey back, taking a different route than they had come, a precaution against anyone who might be following. The sun was at its zenith, the heat building as they left the higher elevation of the settlement and descended back toward the desert floor. "If we push hard, we can reach the ranch by tomorrow evening," Nathaniel calculated. "Then meet with Blackwood. Decide how best to present this evidence to the judge." Rebecca nodded, though her attention seemed divided, her gaze frequently turning back toward the ruins, now disappearing behind them. Nathaniel understood her reluctance to leave. She had found a connection to her past, to her parents, that she had thought lost forever. "We can come back," he offered. "After this is over. Give them proper markers if you want." She looked at him, surprise and something like gratitude in her expression. "I'd like that," she said softly. They deserve to be remembered properly. They rode in companionable silence for a time, each processing what they had discovered. The evidence was compelling, not just the map showing the silver deposits, but the journal entries establishing a clear motive for the destruction of the settlement. Whether it would be enough to convince a judge, especially against the influence of Silver Creek Mining, remained to be seen. As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change, transitioning from the pinyon-juniper woodland back to the more arid terrain of the lower desert. They found a small seep spring and stopped to water the horses and refill their canteens. "What will you do?" Nathaniel asked, as they rested in the meager shade of a boulder. "After this is over, I mean." Rebecca considered the question, her expression thoughtful. "I haven't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "For so long just surviving was enough of a goal. But now," she traced patterns in the sand with a twig, her brow furrowed in contemplation. "I'd like to use what I know, my mother's healing knowledge, the things I've learned since. Perhaps become a midwife or healer." She glanced up at him. "There's always need for that, especially in places where doctors are scarce." Nathaniel nodded. It was a fitting ambition, using the skills passed down from her mother to bring healing to others, a way of honoring her heritage while building something new. "And you?" Rebecca asked. "What will you do when this is finished?" The question caught Nathaniel off guard. He had been so focused on the immediate goal, protecting Rebecca, finding the evidence, seeking justice, that he hadn't considered what might come after. "Don't know," he admitted. "Keep ranching, I suppose. It's a quiet life, but it suits me." He paused, thinking of the telegram from his son. "Might try to mend things with James if he's willing. Meet my grandson." "I hope you can," Rebecca said sincerely. "Family is precious. Too precious to lose to pride or pain." There was wisdom in her words, a perspective gained through loss that Nathaniel respected. He was about to respond when a sound caught his attention, the distant but unmistakable rhythm of hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching at speed. He was on his feet instantly, hand going to his sidearm. "Riders coming. At least 3, maybe more." Rebecca stood as well, her expression alarmed. "Harrington? Could be," Nathaniel conceded. "Or just travelers. Either way, we can't take chances." They quickly gathered their belongings and mounted up, moving away from the spring toward a nearby wash that offered some cover. From its shelter, they could observe the approaching riders without being immediately visible. It didn't take long for Nathaniel's suspicions to be confirmed. 5 riders appeared on the horizon, following their trail with clear purpose. Even at a distance, Nathaniel recognized the lead figure, Wesley Harrington, his black hat and silver-trimmed vest distinctive even in the harsh sunlight. "It's them," he said grimly. "They must have been watching the settlement after all." Rebecca's hand moved to the revolver at her hip, a gesture that spoke of newfound confidence with the weapon. "What do we do?" "Make a stand here." Nathaniel assessed their position. The wash provided some cover, but not enough for a prolonged firefight against superior numbers. And their horses, already tired from the journey, couldn't outrun fresh mounts in open country. "No," he decided. "We need better ground. There's a place about 2 miles east, a box canyon with a narrow entrance. If we can reach it first, we can hold them off from a defended position." Rebecca nodded, trusting his judgment. Without further discussion, they urged their horses into motion, keeping to the wash as long as possible to mask their direction. When they finally had to emerge, they did so at a gallop, making straight for the landmark Nathaniel had mentioned. Behind them, shouts indicated they had been spotted. The pursuit began in earnest, the thunder of hoofbeats growing louder as Harrington and his men gave chase. Nathaniel glanced back to see the distance between them, narrowing, the fresh horses of their pursuers steadily gaining ground. "They're catching up," Rebecca called, her voice steady despite the danger. "Almost there." Nathaniel responded, pointing ahead to where the terrain rose into a jumble of rock formations. "Just beyond that ridge." They pushed their mounts harder, asking for speed the tired animals could barely provide. As they crested the ridge, the box canyon came into view, a natural fortress with high walls and a single narrow entrance. Perfect for defense if they could reach it in time. But the gap was closing too quickly. At their current pace, Harrington's men would overtake them before they could reach the canyon mouth. "Go on ahead," Nathaniel shouted to Rebecca. "Get to the canyon. I'll slow them down." "No," she objected vehemently. "We stay together." "There's no time to argue," he insisted. "The evidence you're carrying is too important. Go!" Before she could protest further, Nathaniel reined his horse around, drawing his rifle from its scabbard in a smooth motion. He took up position on the ridge, presenting a clear target, but also a clear threat. Rebecca hesitated for only a moment before recognizing the logic of his plan. With a nod that conveyed both understanding and concern, she urged her horse toward the canyon entrance. Nathaniel braced the rifle against his shoulder, sighting down the barrel at the approaching riders. They were within range now, close enough for him to make out individual features. Harrington in the lead, flanked by 4 hard-looking men, all armed and clearly intent on their prey. Taking a deep breath, Nathaniel squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, the report echoing off the surrounding rocks. He hadn't aimed to kill, not yet, but to warn. The bullet kicked up dust just in front of Harrington's horse, causing the animal to rear in surprise. The message was clear: come closer at your peril. The riders pulled up, momentarily confused by the unexpected resistance. Nathaniel used the pause to fire again, this time striking the ground near another rider's feet. The man's horse shied violently, nearly unseating him. Harrington raised a hand, halting his men's advance. For a long moment, the two parties assessed each other across the distance, Nathaniel alone on the ridge, the 5 riders clustered below. Then Harrington smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. He raised his voice to carry across the gap between them. "You're only delaying the inevitable red grave," he called. "That evidence won't ever reach a judge, and the girl won't live to testify." Nathaniel didn't respond. Words were useless, now actions would determine the outcome. He fired a third shot closer this time, making it clear that any advance would be met with deadly force. Harrington's smile faded. He conferred briefly with his men, then made a circling gesture with his hand. The riders began to spread out clearly, planning to flank Nathaniel's position. It was time to retreat. Nathaniel fired once more, forcing the nearest rider to duck, then wheeled his horse and galloped toward the canyon where Rebecca waited. Behind him, shouts and the thunder of hooves indicated the pursuit had resumed. The canyon entrance was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. Rebecca had already dismounted and taken up a defensive position behind a large boulder, her revolver ready. As Nathaniel rode in, she provided covering fire, forcing their pursuers to pull back momentarily. Nathaniel dismounted quickly, leading his horse deeper into the canyon, where the animals would be protected from stray bullets. Then, he joined Rebecca at the entrance, rifle in hand. "They'll try to rush us," he said, checking his ammunition. "We need to make them think twice about that." Rebecca nodded, her expression determined. "I won't miss." The confidence in her voice reminded Nathaniel of how quickly she had learned, how naturally she had taken to handling firearms. She was no longer the broken woman he had found in the desert. She had reclaimed her strength, her purpose. "I know you won't," he said, a note of pride in his voice. They didn't have to wait long. Harrington and his men had regrouped, and were now approaching more cautiously, using the scattered rocks for cover. One man made a dash toward the canyon entrance, only to be driven back by Nathaniel's precise shot that splintered the rock beside his head. "They're trying to pin us down until nightfall," Nathaniel observed. "Then they'll have the advantage." Rebecca frowned. "Can we hold out that long? Maybe." Nathaniel assessed their position. The canyon provided excellent defensive cover, but they were effectively trapped. "But we need to consider alternatives." Before he could elaborate, a bullet ricocheted off the boulder near his head, showering them with stone fragments. Nathaniel returned fire, his shot finding its mark in the shoulder of one of Harrington's men. The man fell back with a cry of pain, temporarily reducing the forces against them. 4 left, Rebecca counted. "For now," Nathaniel agreed. "But Harrington's not the type to give up easily. If they can't get to us directly, they'll find another way." As if in confirmation of his words, a movement at the top of the canyon wall caught his eye. One of Harrington's men had circled around and was now attempting to find a firing position from above. "Up there," Nathaniel warned, raising his rifle. Rebecca was quicker. Her revolver cracked, and the man on the rim staggered, clutching his leg before disappearing from view. "Good shot," Nathaniel acknowledged. "I had a good teacher," she replied, a hint of grim humor in her voice despite the dire situation. As the afternoon wore on, the standoff continued. Occasional exchanges of gunfire punctuated long periods of tense waiting. Harrington and his remaining men had taken up positions that kept them mostly shielded from Nathaniel and Rebecca's fire, but also prevented them from advancing. The sun was beginning to lower in the west, shadows lengthening across the canyon floor. Soon, darkness would fall, bringing with it new dangers and opportunities for their adversaries. "We need to move," Nathaniel decided, "before we lose the light completely." Rebecca looked at him questioningly. "Move where they have the entrance covered." "Not the entrance," Nathaniel said, gesturing toward the back of the canyon. "There's a way out, a narrow trail that leads up the far wall. It's difficult, especially for horses, but it's passable." "You knew this place," Rebecca realized. "This wasn't just a random choice for defense." Nathaniel nodded. "Used it before, years ago. The trail comes out on the mesa above, about 3 miles east of here. If we can reach it, we can circle back toward the ranch under cover of darkness." "And the evidence gets through," Rebecca concluded, understanding his strategy. "Exactly." They waited for a lull in the sporadic gunfire, then retreated deeper into the canyon, leading their horses carefully. The trail Nathaniel had mentioned was indeed narrow, a winding path cut into the rock face, barely visible, unless you knew where to look. "I'll go first with the horses," Nathaniel said. "Follow close behind." Rebecca hesitated. "What about them?" She nodded toward the canyon entrance, where Harrington and his men still waited. "They'll figure it out eventually," Nathaniel acknowledged. "But by then, we'll have a good head start." The ascent was treacherous, the horses nervous on the unfamiliar terrain. Nathaniel led them carefully, one step at a time, while Rebecca brought up the rear, occasionally glancing back to ensure they weren't being followed. They were about halfway up when a shout from below confirmed their escape had been discovered. Gunfire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the canyon walls around them, but the angle was poor for their attackers, and the growing darkness made accurate shooting nearly impossible. "Keep moving," Nathaniel urged, pulling the reluctant horses upward. "We're almost there." The final stretch of the trail was the steepest, requiring them to practically drag the frightened animals up the incline. But at last, they reached the top, emerging onto the flat expanse of the mesa just as the last light faded from the sky. Without pausing to rest, they mounted and set off eastward, pushing their tired horses to a canter. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, as Harrington and his men struggled with the difficult trail in darkness. "We've gained some time," Nathaniel said as they rode, "but they won't give up, not with what's at stake." Rebecca nodded, the precious saddlebag containing the evidence clutched firmly against her side. "How far to the ranch?" "Too far to reach tonight, especially with the horses this tired. But there's a line shack about an hour's ride from here, part of an old cattle operation. We can rest there, continue at first light." It was fully dark now, the landscape illuminated only by starlight and a rising quarter moon. They rode in silence, conserving their energy and that of their mounts. Nathaniel led the way, navigating by the stars and his memory of the terrain. The line shack, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room shelter with a sagging roof and walls that barely kept out the wind. But it had a door that could be barred, a small stove for heat, and enough space for them to stretch out their bedrolls. After seeing to the horses, they settled inside, too exhausted for conversation. Nathaniel built a small fire in the stove, careful to keep it minimal so no light would show through the cracks in the walls. The meager warmth was welcome against the desert night's chill. Rebecca sat close to the stove, the saddlebag still clutched protectively. Her face, in the faint glow of the fire, showed signs of the day's strained lines of fatigue around her eyes. A tightness to her mouth that spoke of pain held at bay through sheer will. "You should rest," Nathaniel said, settling on the opposite side of the small room. "I'll take first watch." She nodded, too tired to argue. Laying out her bedroll, she finally set the saddlebag aside, though within easy reach. Before lying down, she looked across at Nathaniel, her expression softening. "Thank you," she said simply, "for today, for everything." Nathaniel shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this." "Even so," Rebecca insisted. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know that I understand better now. Why you've helped me, why you've risked so much." There was a question in her eyes, one that Nathaniel wasn't sure he could answer. What was he to her now? Not quite a friend, certainly not a father figure. Perhaps just a fellow traveler on a road paved with regret and hope in equal measure. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "Dawn comes early." Rebecca held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded and lay down, pulling her blanket up against the night's chill. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into the rhythm of exhausted sleep. Nathaniel settled against the wall rifle across his knees, prepared for a long night's vigil. Outside, the desert wind whispered around the corners of the small shelter, carrying the scent of sage and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called its lonely cry echoing across the empty landscape. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Harrington and his men still pursuing the long ride back to the ranch, the uncertain reception of their evidence by the authorities. But for now, in this moment of relative peace, Nathaniel allowed himself to acknowledge a truth he had been avoiding. In helping Rebecca in fighting for her cause, he had found something he had thought lost forever: purpose. Not redemption, he was too clear-eyed to believe that was possible, but perhaps a kind of atonement. A chance to put right in some small way what he had once helped destroy. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was something. And in a life marked by regret, perhaps that was the most he could hope for. Nathaniel woke Rebecca just before dawn, his hand gentle on her shoulder. She came awake instantly, years of vigilance having trained her body to transition from sleep to full alertness in a heartbeat. "Time to move," he said quietly. "No sign of pursuit yet, but they'll be on our trail soon enough." Rebecca nodded quickly, rolling up her bedding and gathering her few possessions. The precious saddlebag containing the evidence never left her side. Outside, the eastern sky was just beginning to lighten a pale rim of gold against the deep blue of night. The air was cold, carrying the crisp scent of sage and dust. "How are the horses?" Rebecca asked as they stepped out of the line shack. "Tired, but they'll make it," Nathaniel replied. "We'll need to pace them, though. Can't push too hard." They saddled the animals in silence, each movement efficient, no energy wasted on unnecessary words. When they were ready, Nathaniel paused, studying the horizon with narrowed eyes. "We'll head southeast," he decided. "Longer route to the ranch, but less exposed. Might throw them off our trail at least for a while." Rebecca didn't question his judgment. In matters of survival of strategy, she had come to trust him implicitly. It was an odd realization that the man who had once been part of destroying her world was now the one she relied on to navigate its dangers. They rode out as the first rays of sun breached the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The landscape was transformed in the early light, the harshness of noon replaced by a soft golden glow that lent even the most barren stretches a strange beauty. For the first hour, they rode in watchful silence, Nathaniel frequently glancing back to check for signs of pursuit. The terrain worked in their favor, rocky ground that held hoofprints, poorly scattered juniper and mesquite providing occasional cover. As the sun climbed higher, Rebecca broke the silence. "How far to the ranch?" "At this pace, we'll reach it by mid-afternoon," Nathaniel calculated, "assuming we don't run into trouble." "And if we do?" Rebecca's hand rested lightly on the revolver at her hip, a gesture that had become automatic in recent days. "Then we deal with it," Nathaniel said simply. He glanced at her, noting the determined set of her jaw. the steadiness of her gaze. "You've changed since I found you in the desert." Rebecca considered this. "Not changed," she corrected. "Returned to who I was before everything." Nathaniel nodded, understanding what she meant. The woman he had rescued, broken, desperate, asking to be buried rather than saved, had not been the true Rebecca Quinn. She had been a shell, a survival mechanism built to endure unbearable circumstances. "Your parents would be proud," he said quietly. Rebecca looked at him sharply, surprised by the observation. Then her expression softened. "I hope so," she said. "I've tried to honor them in my way, even when it seemed impossible." They rode on the sun, climbing higher, the heat building as the morning progressed. Around midday, they stopped briefly in the shade of a rocky outcrop, allowing the horses to rest and taking the opportunity to drink from their dwindling water supply. "We should reach Blackwood Creek in about an hour," Nathaniel said, scanning the horizon. "We can water the horses there, refill our canteens." Rebecca nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. Still no sign of pursuit. None, but that doesn't mean they've given up. Nathaniel's expression was grim. "Harrington has too much at stake to let us go easily." "The evidence," Rebecca said, patting the saddlebag that never left her side. "It's not just about me anymore, is it? It's about exposing the truth after all these years." "It's about both," Nathaniel replied. "They want you silenced and the evidence destroyed. Either one alone would be a problem for them. Both together." He shook his head. "Well, that's why we're being hunted." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, considering. "What do you think will happen?" she finally asked. "If we make it to the judge, if he sees the evidence and believes us?" It was a question Nathaniel had been pondering himself. The ideal outcome, justice served, the guilty punished, Rebecca's people vindicated, seemed almost too much to hope for. The world rarely aligned itself so neatly with righteousness. Best case, Silver Creek Mining loses its claim to the land. The people behind the company, whoever ordered the attack, face prosecution. He paused. Worst case, they use their influence to bury the evidence, discredit our testimony. Nothing changes. And the most likely case, Rebecca pressed. Nathaniel sighed. Something in between. The truth comes out at least partially. Some compensation is ordered, some reputations are damaged. But the real architects of what happened probably escape serious consequences. It wasn't what Rebecca wanted to hear, he knew. But he wouldn't lie to her, not now, not about this. To his surprise, she nodded acceptance. "That's what I thought too," she admitted. "But even that would be something. The truth acknowledged, if not fully reckoned with." Once again, Nathaniel was struck by her resilience, her ability to face harsh realities without losing sight of what was possible. In another life, under different circumstances, she might have been a leader, a builder of communities like her father before her. Perhaps she still could be. "We should move on," he said, standing and brushing dust from his clothes. "Still a long way to go." They resumed their journey, the terrain gradually changing as they descended toward the creek Nathaniel had mentioned. The sparse desert vegetation gave way to more abundant growth, cottonwoods and willows marking the course of the waterway long before it became visible. When they reached the creek, they dismounted gratefully, leading the horses to the water's edge. The animals drank deeply, while Nathaniel and Rebecca refilled their canteens upstream. "We're making good time," Nathaniel observed, studying the sun's position. "Another 3 hours to the ranch, maybe less." Rebecca nodded, but her attention was elsewhere, her gaze fixed on something across the creek. Nathaniel followed her line of sight, but saw nothing unusual, just the opposite bank, a stand of cottonwoods, the rolling hills beyond. "What is it?" he asked. "Movement," she said quietly. "In those trees, just for a moment." Nathaniel tensed his hand, moving instinctively to his sidearm. He scanned the area more carefully, eyes narrowed against the glare of sunlight on water. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then, almost imperceptibly, a branch swayed against the wind. "Get down!" he said sharply, pulling Rebecca behind the cover of a large boulder at the creek's edge. The warning came just in time. A rifle shot cracked through the air, the bullet striking the ground where they had been standing moments before. The horses startled, moving away from the water in panic. "Damn it," Nathaniel muttered. "They found us." "How?" Rebecca asked, pressed against the boulder beside him. "We were careful." "Doesn't matter now," Nathaniel replied grimly. "They're between us and the ranch." Another shot rang out, then another bullets, pinging off the rocks around them. Nathaniel risked a quick glance around the edge of the boulder, trying to gauge their opposition. "At least 3 shooters," he reported, "spread out along the tree line." Rebecca checked her revolver, ensuring it was fully loaded. "What's the plan?" Nathaniel considered their options, none of which were particularly appealing. They were pinned down, outnumbered, and their horses had scattered, one already disappearing over a nearby rise, the other nervously pawing the ground about 50 yards away. "We need to move," he decided. "This position is too exposed. See that dry wash about 100 yards to our right? If we can reach it, we'll have better cover, maybe a route to circle around them." Rebecca nodded, her expression determined despite the danger. "I'll provide covering fire. On your signal." Nathaniel was struck again by her composure in the face of mortal threat. "Ready on 3. 1, 2, 3. He broke from cover, sprinting toward the wash, as Rebecca leaned out from behind the boulder and fired 3 rapid shots toward the tree line. The distraction worked. The enemy fire shifted toward her position, giving Nathaniel time to reach the relative safety of the dry creek bed. Once there, he immediately returned fire, providing Rebecca with the same opportunity to move. She ran in a low crouch, the saddlebag clutched firmly against her side. A bullet kicked up dust at her heels, but she reached the wash unharmed, sliding down beside Nathaniel with a controlled tumble. "Good work," he said, squeezing off another shot to keep their attackers at bay. "Now we need to work our way up this wash, try to get behind them." They began moving, staying low, using the eroded banks of the dry creek bed for cover. The wash curved away from the main creek, heading roughly east, not the direction they wanted to go, but better than staying pinned down. The gunfire behind them became sporadic, then stopped altogether. The sudden silence was more concerning than the shooting had been. "They're moving too," Nathaniel guessed, "trying to cut us off." They increased their pace, pushing through the tangled brush that had taken root in the wash. The sound of hoofbeats confirmed Nathaniel's suspicion their pursuers had mounted up and were attempting to circle around. After about a half-mile, the wash began to shallow out, providing less and less cover. Ahead, the terrain opened into a broad, flat area with little concealment. "We can't cross that," Rebecca said, assessing the exposure. "We'd be perfect targets." Nathaniel nodded grimly. "We need to change direction. Head back toward the creek, try to lose them in the thicker vegetation near the water." They altered course, moving at a crouch through the diminishing cover of the wash. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, approaching from multiple directions. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Harrington had spread his men out, creating a net that was steadily closing around them. "There!" Rebecca pointed to a dense thicket of willows about 200 yards away, marking the course of the main creek. "If we can reach that," Nathaniel nodded. It was their best option, slim as it was. "I'll go first, draw their fire. You make for the thicket." "No," Rebecca objected. We go together. I won't leave you behind." Before Nathaniel could argue, the distinctive sound of a shotgun blast tore through the air, followed immediately by the thunder of galloping hooves. But these sounds came from an unexpected direction, the east, where the flat land stretched toward distant hills. "What the hell?" Nathaniel muttered, risking a glance over the edge of the wash. What he saw made him blink in surprise. Riders, at least 4 of them, were charging toward their position from the east, firing as they came. But they weren't shooting at Nathaniel and Rebecca. Their fire was directed at Harrington's men, who had been closing in from the west. "Reinforcements?" Rebecca asked, confusion evident in her voice. "Looks like it," Nathaniel replied, equally baffled. "But I don't know who—" His words were cut short, as one of the new arrivals crested a small rise directly above their position in the wash. The rider reined in sharply, looking down at them. For a brief, tense moment, Nathaniel raised his rifle, uncertain whether this was friend or foe. Then the rider pushed back his hat, revealing a familiar face beneath a shock of gray hair. "Blackwood!" Nathaniel called up in disbelief. The sheriff grinned down at them. "Figured you might need some help. Brought a few friends." Relief flooded through Nathaniel. "Your timing is impeccable." "Always was," Blackwood replied cheerfully. "Now you two stay put. We'll handle Harrington and his boys." He wheeled his horse around and galloped back toward the ongoing firefight, leaving Nathaniel and Rebecca to exchange bewildered glances. How did he know where to find us? Rebecca wondered. Daniel always did have a sixth sense for trouble. Nathaniel replied, a hint of admiration in his voice. "And he knows this country as well as I do." They remained in the shelter of the wash, listening as the gunfire intensified, then gradually diminished. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably no more than 15 minutes, Blackwood returned, this time accompanied by another rider, a younger man wearing a deputy's badge. "All clear," Blackwood announced. "Harrington and one of his men got away heading west. The other 2 won't be bothering anyone ever again." Nathaniel and Rebecca climbed out of the wash, both grateful and cautious. "You've got perfect timing, Daniel," Nathaniel said. "But how did you know we needed help?" Blackwood dismounted, handing his reins to the deputy. "Got word that Harrington and his men had left Tombstone in a hurry right after I started spreading rumors about having you 2 in protective custody. Figured they'd discovered the ruse and were on your trail." He shrugged. "After that, it was just a matter of tracking. You were heading back to your ranch, and this is the most direct route from the old settlement." Rebecca stepped forward, clutching the saddlebag. "We found it, Sheriff. The evidence. A map showing silver deposits on our land, my father's journal documenting threats from Fallon before the attack. It's all here." Blackwood's expression turned serious. "That's good news, but we're not out of danger yet. If Harrington makes it back to his employers, they'll know we have proof," Nathaniel finished. "They might try something more direct." "Exactly." Blackwood gestured to his deputy and the 2 other men who had accompanied him, grizzled ranchers by the look of them, solid men who knew how to handle themselves in a fight. "That's why we're going to escort you straight to Tucson. Judge Monroe arrived yesterday ahead of schedule. If we ride hard, we can be there by nightfall." Nathaniel glanced at Rebecca, reading the fatigue in her face, despite her determined expression. "It's been a long few days, Daniel. Rebecca needs rest." "I'm fine," she insisted. "If we have a chance to present this evidence directly to the judge, we should take it." Blackwood nodded approval. "That's the spirit. My men rounded up your horses. They didn't get far. We've got fresh mounts, if you need them." The decision was made quickly after that. They would ride for Tucson, immediately taking advantage of the unexpected opportunity to get the evidence to Judge Monroe before Silver Creek Mining could interfere. Blackwood's deputy would split off to deliver a message to Nathaniel's ranch, explaining their change of plans and ensuring the property would be watched in their absence. As they prepared to depart, Nathaniel pulled Blackwood aside. "There's something else, Daniel. My son, the telegram, said he was coming at the end of the month." "I know," Blackwood assured him. "Already sent a wire to Boston warning him to delay his visit. Haven't received a reply yet, but the message should reach him in time." Nathaniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "Thank you for everything." Blackwood clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't thank me yet. This isn't over." The ride to Tucson was hard but uneventful. They pushed their mounts as much as they dared, stopping only briefly to rest the animals. As the sun began to set, the outskirts of the town came into view, a welcome sight after the long, tense journey. Tucson, in 1885, was a growing community, no longer the rough frontier outpost it had once been. The arrival of the railroad a few years earlier had brought increased commerce and civilization, though the town still retained much of its frontier character. Adobe buildings lined the main streets, interspersed with newer wooden structures. The courthouse, their destination, was one of the more imposing edifices, a two-story building of red brick with white trim, looking somewhat out of place among its more modest neighbors. Blackwood led them directly there, his badge ensuring immediate access despite the late hour. Judge William Monroe was still in his chambers reviewing cases for the following day's session. He was a tall, austere man with a neat white beard and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they fell upon. "Sheriff Blackwood," he greeted them formally. "This must be urgent to warrant an after-hours intrusion." "It is, Your Honor," Blackwood confirmed. "We have evidence of a grave injustice, one that's been covered up for nearly 2 decades. Monroe's gaze shifted to Nathaniel and Rebecca, noting their trail-worn appearance, the saddlebag Rebecca clutched protectively. "I see. And who might these individuals be?" Introductions were made, and then, at Monroe's invitation, Rebecca began to tell her story. She spoke clearly and concisely, laying out the history of her settlement, the attack that destroyed it, and her subsequent journey through captivity to the present moment. When she reached the part about finding the map and journal, she carefully removed them from the saddlebag, placing them on the judge's desk. Monroe listened without interruption, his expression giving nothing away. When Rebecca finished, he examined the evidence, methodically reading passages from the journal, studying the map with its clear markings of silver deposits. "This is disturbing information, Miss Quinn," he finally said, looking up from the documents. "If what you say is true, and this evidence certainly suggests it is, then a terrible crime has been committed, not just against your community, but against the rule of law itself." "It's true, Your Honor," Nathaniel spoke up. "I know because I was there. I led the attack on their settlement." Monroe's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You admit this freely, Mr. Redgrave?" "I do," Nathaniel confirmed, meeting the judge's gaze steadily. "I was following orders, but that's no excuse. I've lived with what I did every day since. Yet now you stand with Miss Quinn helping her seek justice for the very crime you participated in." Monroe's tone was neutral, but the question was implicit. "Yes, sir. I can't undo what I did, but I can help ensure the truth is known." Monroe considered this, then turned to Blackwood. "And you, Sheriff, what is your role in all this?" "I served with Redgrave after the war," Blackwood explained, "though I wasn't present for this particular operation. I've known for years that something wasn't right about it, but never had proof until now." The judge nodded slowly, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the desk. "Silver Creek Mining Company," he mused. "They've been very active in land acquisition throughout the territory. Their representatives have appeared in my court several times, always, with impeccable documentation and powerful attorneys." "Powerful backers, too, I'd imagine," Blackwood added. The kind that might try to influence even a federal judge. Monroe's expression hardened. If that's a suggestion that I might be susceptible to such influence, Sheriff, you're mistaken. Not at all, Your Honor. Blackwood backtracked smoothly. Merely an observation about their usual tactics. Monroe turned his attention back to the evidence before him. This is compelling, but we'll need more to build a proper case. Testimony from others who knew about the settlement survey records from before and after the attack, financial documentation showing who profited from the land transfer. That could take months to compile, Rebecca objected. And meanwhile, Silver Creek continues their operations on land that was stolen through murder. Justice rarely moves as quickly as we might wish, Miss Quinn, Monroe replied, not unkindly. But that doesn't mean it isn't moving. He straightened the papers before him, coming to a decision. Here's what I'll do. I'll issue an immediate injunction freezing all Silver Creek mining operations on the land in question, pending a full investigation. I'll also authorize federal marshals to secure the area and preserve any additional evidence that might be found. It wasn't everything Rebecca had hoped for, but it was a start, a significant one. The relief on her face was evident. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said sincerely. "Don't thank me yet," Monroe cautioned. "This is just the beginning. Silver Creek will fight this with every resource at their disposal. And they still have Harrington out there, who knows what you've done and what evidence you possess." "Which brings us to the matter of your safety," Blackwood interjected. "Redgrave's ranch isn't secure enough. They've already attacked it once." Monroe nodded agreement. "I'll arrange for protective custody for both of you until the preliminary hearing. The marshal's office has secure accommodations." Nathaniel and Rebecca exchanged glances. Neither relished the idea of being confined even for their own protection, but the logic was undeniable. They had made powerful enemies, and those enemies were now desperate. "How long until the hearing?" Nathaniel asked. "I can schedule it for 3 days from now," Monroe replied. "That should give us time to secure the evidence and prepare the initial case." He looked directly at Rebecca. "You understand, Miss Quinn, that you will need to testify. To face questions not just about the attack, but about your life since then, including your time at the Red House and the death of Maxwell Fallon." Rebecca's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "I understand. I have nothing to hide, Your Honor. Not anymore." "Very well." Monroe stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Sheriff, please escort Miss Quinn and Mr. Redgrave to the federal marshal's office. I'll send instructions ahead, so they'll be expected." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "For what it's worth, I believe you both, and I intend to see that justice is done, however belated it may be." As they left the courthouse, the night air cool against their faces, Nathaniel felt a curious mixture of hope and apprehension. They had taken a significant step toward justice, yet the danger was far from past. And for all his confidence in Monroe's integrity, Nathaniel knew how powerful the forces aligned against them were. "What do you think?" he asked Rebecca as they walked toward the marshal's office, Blackwood, a few paces ahead. She considered the question, her face half illuminated by the gas lamps lining the street. "I think it's more than I ever expected," she admitted. "For 17 years, I believed no one would ever know the truth, let alone care about it. Now," she shrugged slightly, "now there's a chance." "A good chance," Nathaniel affirmed. "Monroe is known for his integrity. If anyone can stand against Silver Creek's influence, it's him." Rebecca nodded, but there was still a shadow in her eyes. "And after assuming the injunction holds the investigation proceeds, what then?" It was a question Nathaniel had been asking himself. Their unlikely alliance had been forged in crisis, united by a common goal. What would happen when that goal was achieved, or at least set firmly in motion? "I don't know," he admitted. "One step at a time, I suppose." Rebecca seemed about to say more when Blackwood rejoined them, having spoken briefly with a deputy who had approached him. "Change of plans," the sheriff announced. "We're not going to the marshal's office after all. Got word that there's been suspicious activity there, unknown men watching the building. Could be nothing, but I'm not taking chances." "Where are we going then?" Nathaniel asked, immediately alert. "I've got a friend who runs a boarding house on the edge of town. Discreet, secure, not a place anyone would think to look for you." Blackwood led them down a side street, away from the main thoroughfare. "We'll lay low there until the hearing." The boarding house proved to be a modest two-story structure set back from the road, surrounded by a high adobe wall. The proprietress, a stern-faced widow named Mrs. Hollister, greeted Blackwood with evident familiarity and showed them to adjacent rooms on the second floor facing the rear of the property. "No one comes or goes without me knowing," she assured them. "And I keep a shotgun beneath the counter. Used it twice in 15 years of business, and I'm not shy about using it again if needed." Nathaniel believed her. There was a hardness to Mrs. Hollister that spoke of a woman who had survived the frontier on her own terms, making no concessions to those who might threaten her domain. After she departed, Blackwood briefed them on the security arrangements. He would remain at the boarding house overnight, and deputies he trusted would take shifts watching the property. Monroe had promised to send word when the marshals were ready to provide proper protection. "Get some rest," the sheriff advised. "You're both dead on your feet. I'll wake you if anything changes." With that, he took up position in a chair at the end of the hallway, his shotgun across his knees. Nathaniel and Rebecca retreated to their respective rooms, the events of the past few days finally catching up to them, now that a moment's respite had been granted. Nathaniel's room was simply furnished, but clean: a narrow bed, a washstand with basin and pitcher, a small table beside the window. He removed his boots and gun belt, but didn't undress further, unwilling to be caught unprepared if trouble came. After washing the worst of the trail dust from his face and hands, he stretched out on the bed, intending only to rest his eyes for a moment. Sleep claimed him almost instantly, pulling him down into a darkness untroubled by dreams. Nathaniel woke to the sound of soft knocking. For a moment, he was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing his sleep-fogged mind. Then memory rushed back, and he was on his feet in an instant, gun in hand. "Who is it?" he called quietly. "It's me," came Rebecca's voice from the hallway. "May I come in?" Nathaniel tucked the gun into his waistband and opened the door. Rebecca stood there looking as tired as he felt, but there was a restlessness about her that suggested sleep had been elusive. "Everything all right?" he asked, stepping aside to let her enter. "Yes, no, I don't know." She paced to the window, looking out at the moonlit courtyard below. "I couldn't sleep. Too much happening too fast." Nathaniel understood. After days of constant movement, constant danger, the sudden stillness felt unnatural, almost threatening in its own way. "We're safe here," he assured her. "Blackwood knows what he's doing." "I know." Rebecca turned from the window, her expression troubled. "It's not that. It's everything else." Testifying at the hearing, facing questions about Fallon, about the Red House, having my life laid bare for strangers to judge. Nathaniel nodded slowly. "It won't be easy," he acknowledged. "But you're stronger than you know, Rebecca. You've survived things that would have broken most people." "Have I?" She looked at him directly, a vulnerability in her eyes that she rarely allowed to show. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm really as whole as I pretend to be, if the pieces can ever truly fit back together, after being shattered so completely? It was a question Nathaniel had asked himself many times over the years. Can a broken soul ever be fully mended? Or are there always cracks, fault lines, where the pieces don't quite match up anymore? I don't know, he said honestly. But I know you've come further than anyone had a right to expect, including yourself. Rebecca's lips curved in a small, sad smile. Perhaps. She moved to the edge of the bed, sitting down with a sigh. Do you ever think about what might have been? If different choices had been made, different paths taken, more often than I care to admit, Nathaniel replied, leaning against the wall opposite her. Used to drive myself half mad with it in the early years after your settlement. And now, he considered the question. Now I try to focus on what's in front of me. What can be done today, not what might have been done yesterday. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. My mother used to say something similar. Yesterday is a ghost, tomorrow is a dream, today is the gift. Her voice softened with memory. She was wise, my mother. Even when the world made no sense to me, she found ways to make it bearable. You have her strength, Nathaniel observed. I see it in you every day. Rebecca looked up, surprised by the compliment. Thank you, she said simply. A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that only develops between people who have faced danger together, who have seen each other at their most vulnerable, and remained steadfast. What will you do? Rebecca finally asked. After the hearing, assuming it goes well. Will you go back to your ranch? Nathaniel had been pondering the same question. I suppose so, he said. It's home such as it is, though I might need to rebuild that barn properly this time. Rebecca smiled at that, a genuine expression that lightened her features. I could help. I'm good with a hammer, remember. I remember, Nathaniel assured her. The offer touched him more than he cared to admit. The idea that she might remain in his life in whatever capacity after their immediate purpose was fulfilled. And your son, she prompted. Will you see him? Nathaniel's expression grew more serious. Yes, regardless of how this all turns out, it's time to try to mend that fence. Past time, really. I'm glad, Rebecca said sincerely. Family is too precious to lose to pride or old wounds. The echo of her earlier words struck Nathaniel. Old wounds. It seemed fitting, given all they had endured. Wounds inflicted wounds, suffered wounds, slowly healing in the harsh light of truth. What about you? He asked. After the hearing, Rebecca's gaze drifted back to the window to the moonlit world beyond. I don't know, she admitted. For so long my only goal was survival. Then it became escape. Then finding proof of what had happened to my people. She shrugged slightly. I never really thought about what comes after. You mentioned becoming a healer, Nathaniel reminded her. Using your mother's knowledge. Yes. Her expression brightened at the memory of their conversation. I'd like that. To help others to honor her teachings. You'd be good at it, Nathaniel said with conviction. You've got the hands for it and the heart. Rebecca looked down at her hands, strong, capable hands that had known both gentleness and violence. Perhaps, she said softly, though I have much to learn still. Another silence fell comfortable yet charged with unspoken possibilities. Nathaniel found himself studying her profile in the dim light, noting the quiet dignity in her bearing, despite all she had endured. She was, he realized, one of the most remarkable people he had ever known. You should try to rest, he said eventually. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Rebecca nodded, rising from the bed. You're right. She moved to the door, then paused, looking back at him. Thank you, Nathaniel, for everything. Before he could respond, she was gone, the door closing softly behind her. Nathaniel stared at the space where she had been feeling as though something important had just transpired, though he couldn't quite define what it was. Sleep was slow to return after that, his mind too full of Rebecca Quinn and the uncertain future that awaited them both. The next 2 days passed in a curious limbo, the boarding house becoming a sanctuary of sorts as they awaited the hearing. Blackwood came and went, bringing news from the outside world. Judge Monroe had issued the injunction against Silver Creek mining, as promised, freezing all operations on the disputed land. Federal marshals had been dispatched to secure the area and collect additional evidence. Silver Creek's response had been swift and predictable. Their attorneys had filed motions to dismiss the injunction, citing lack of standing, insufficient evidence, and the statute of limitations. Monroe had denied all motions, setting the stage for what promised to be a contentious hearing. More concerning was the news that Wesley Harrington had disappeared. After fleeing the firefight at the creek, he had briefly returned to Tombstone, then vanished. His establishment, the Red House, continued to operate under the management of his lieutenant, but Harrington himself was nowhere to be found. He could be anywhere, Blackwood warned them. Possibly still in the territory, possibly fled to Mexico or California. Either way, he remains a threat. Despite this lingering danger, the atmosphere within the boarding house gradually relaxed as security arrangements solidified. 2 federal marshals had been assigned to protect Nathaniel and Rebecca, allowing Blackwood to return to his regular duties. Mrs. Hollister proved to be not just a vigilant guardian, but also an excellent cook, insisting that her guests needed proper meals after their ordeal. For Rebecca, the respite provided an opportunity to prepare for the hearing, organizing her thoughts and memories into a coherent narrative. Nathaniel helped as best he could, his own recollections of the attack filling in details she had been too young to remember clearly. It was during one of these sessions, as they sat together in the boarding house parlor reviewing their testimony, that Blackwood arrived with unexpected news. "Telegram came for you, Nat," he announced, holding out a yellow slip of paper. "From Boston." Nathaniel took it with a sense of foreboding, fearing bad news about his son. But as he read the brief message, his expression transformed from concern to disbelief. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, noting the change. Nathaniel handed her the telegram wordlessly. She read it aloud. "Father, stop, received your warning, stop. Too late already in Santa Fe, stop. Continuing to Tucson as planned, stop. Arrive tomorrow afternoon, stop, James." Tomorrow, Nathaniel repeated the word, barely audible. "He's coming tomorrow, right in the middle of all this." Blackwood frowned. "Bad timing, but we can handle it. I'll arrange for someone to meet him at the station, bring him straight here. He'll be safe enough." Nathaniel nodded, but his mind was racing ahead to the implications. His son was coming with his wife and infant son into a potentially dangerous situation. More than that, James would be arriving just as Nathaniel was preparing to testify about the very events that had driven them apart a decade earlier. "It'll be all right, Nat," Blackwood assured him, seeing his distress. "The hearing's day after tomorrow. By then, the worst of the danger should be past." "It's not just the danger I'm worried about," Nathaniel admitted. "It's—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the complex mix of emotions the telegram had triggered. Rebecca, however, seemed to understand. "You're afraid of how he'll react when he learns you're testifying about what happened at the settlement," she said quietly. "That it will reopen old wounds." Nathaniel nodded, grateful for her perception. 10 years we've been estranged, all because he couldn't reconcile the father he thought he knew with the man who participated in that attack. And now, just when there might be a chance to mend things between us, maybe it's not as bad as you think," Rebecca suggested. The fact that you're testifying, that you're helping to bring the truth to light, that counts for something, doesn't it? It might, Nathaniel conceded, or it might just remind him of why he left in the first place. Blackwood, practical as always, cut through the uncertainty. Only one way to find out. In the meantime, we focus on keeping everyone safe and getting through the hearing. The sheriff's words, blunt but true, helped restore Nathaniel's perspective. One step at a time, he reminded himself. Deal with what's in front of you. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Nathaniel found himself alternating between rehearsing his testimony and wondering what he would say to his son after 10 years of silence. By evening, he was too restless to remain indoors, taking up position on the small balcony outside his room, watching the street below with the vigilance of a man accustomed to danger. Rebecca joined him there as twilight deepened into true night, the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, leaning against the railing beside him. "Didn't try," he admitted. "Too much on my mind." She nodded, understanding. "James?" Among other things. Nathaniel's gaze remained fixed on the quiet street, though his thoughts were elsewhere. "I've been thinking about what happens after. After the hearing, after James arrives, after everything." And he turned to look at her, then his weathered face softened by the gathering darkness. "I don't know exactly, but I know I don't want to go back to the way things were before. The silence, the isolation. It was a kind of living death." Rebecca's expression was thoughtful. "What do you want instead?" It was a simple question, but one Nathaniel had rarely allowed himself to consider. What did he want? Not just the absence of pain or guilt, but something positive, something to move toward rather than away from. "Connection," he said finally. "To James and his family, if they'll have me. To whatever community I can find or build." He paused, gathering courage. "To you, if that's something you might want too." The last words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them had fully acknowledged until now. Rebecca's eyes widened slightly, then softened with an emotion Nathaniel couldn't quite name. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would like that very much." The simple statement carried a world of possibility. Not a declaration of love. They were both too scarred, too cautious for that, but an acknowledgement of something valuable that had grown between them, something worth nurturing. "Good," Nathaniel said, his voice rough with feeling. "That's good." They stood together in comfortable silence after that, watching, as the stars emerged one by one, each lost in private thoughts, yet somehow more connected than before. James Redgrave arrived in Tucson the following afternoon, stepping down from the train with the wary expression of a man entering unfamiliar territory. At 35, he strongly resembled a younger version of his father, the same tall frame, the same set to his jaw, though without the deep lines that years of regret had etched into Nathaniel's face. Beside him was a slender woman with dark hair and olive skin, cradling an infant wrapped in a light blanket. Elena, Nathaniel's daughter-in-law, whom he had never met, and little Nathaniel, the grandson, named for him. Blackwood had arranged for a deputy to meet them at the station and escort them directly to the boarding house, bypassing the hotel where they had originally planned to stay. The deputy explained the situation in broad terms, that there was some danger, that it was safer for them to remain with Nathaniel until it passed, but provided few details, leaving that task to Nathaniel himself. The reunion was awkward at first. Father and son facing each other across the parlor of Mrs. Hollister's boarding house, a decade of silence and hurt standing between them like an invisible wall. "You look well, James," Nathaniel finally said, breaking the impasse. "You look older," his son replied, then winced at his own words. "I didn't mean, it's all right," Nathaniel assured him. "I am older. 10 years older, to be exact." A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. "Yes, I suppose you are." He gestured to the woman beside him. "This is Elena, my wife." Nathaniel turned to her, struck by her resemblance to Rebecca, not in specific features, but in the quiet strength she projected, the clear intelligence in her dark eyes. "Mrs. Redgrave," he greeted her formally. "It's an honor to finally meet you." Elena's smile was warm, genuine. "Please call me Elena, and the honor is mine. James has told me much about you." "Well, not all bad, I hope," Nathaniel said, attempting humor to mask his uncertainty. "Not all," she confirmed her tone, suggesting that she had formed her own opinions beyond whatever her husband had shared. The baby in her arms stirred, making small noises of discontent. Elena rocked him gently, murmuring soothing words in Spanish. "And this is Nathaniel," James said, a note of pride entering his voice. "Your grandson." Nathaniel stepped closer, looking down at the infant with a sense of wonder. The child had Elena's coloring, but James's features in miniature. He was perfect. "May I?" Nathaniel asked hesitantly, extending his arms. Elena nodded carefully, transferring the baby to his grandfather's embrace. Nathaniel held him with surprising ease, the old skill returning despite the years that had passed since he had held his own son this way. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "I'm your grandfather." The baby blinked up at him, dark eyes, curious, then yawned widely, apparently unimpressed by the introduction. The adults chuckled, and some of the tension in the room dissipated. As Elena took the baby back, Nathaniel became aware of Rebecca standing quietly in the doorway, observing the family reunion with a mixture of warmth and hesitation, unsure of her place in this moment. "James, Elena," Nathaniel said, gesturing for her to join them. "This is Rebecca Quinn. She's—" He paused, realizing there was no simple way to explain their relationship. "She's the reason I'm involved in the situation," Sheriff Blackwood mentioned. Rebecca stepped forward, offering her hand to James. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said sincerely. "Your father has spoken of you often." James shook her hand, clearly curious but too polite to press for details in this initial meeting. "Miss Quinn, I hope you'll forgive my confusion. The deputy's explanation was rather vague." "Perhaps we should all sit down," Nathaniel suggested. "There's a great deal to explain, and not all of it is easy to hear." Over the next hour, with occasional input from Rebecca, Nathaniel laid out the whole story. The attack on the settlement 17 years ago, his role in it, Rebecca's survival and subsequent hardships, their chance reunion when he found her in the desert, and the evidence they had discovered linking the massacre to Silver Creek Mining's interest in the land. James listened in silence, his expression growing increasingly troubled as the narrative unfolded. When Nathaniel finally fell silent, having brought the story up to the present moment and the impending hearing, his son sat back in his chair, visibly processing all he had heard. "This is why I left," James said at last, his voice tight with emotion. "Because I found those reports, because I couldn't reconcile the father I knew with the man who could participate in such an atrocity." Nathaniel nodded, accepting the judgment without defense. "I know, and you were right to leave. What I did, there's no justifying it. Yet now you're testifying against the very interests you once served," James observed, "risking your life to bring the truth to light." "It doesn't erase what happened," Nathaniel said quietly. "Nothing can do that. But it's something I can do now today to try to set at least part of it right." James studied his father for a long moment, then turned his gaze to Rebecca. "And you, Miss Quinn, After all you've suffered because of my father's actions, you've chosen to stand with him in this. Why? Rebecca considered the question carefully before answering. Because the man who found me in the desert, who nursed me back to health, who has risked everything to help me find justice, that man is not the same one who led the attack 17 years ago. People change, Mr. Redgrave, sometimes for the worse, but sometimes for the better. Her words hung in the air, a testament not just to Nathaniel's transformation, but to her own capacity for understanding and perhaps forgiveness. Elena, who had been silent throughout the narrative, spoke up. In my culture, we have a saying, El arrepentimiento verdadero limpia el alma. True repentance cleanses the soul. She looked at Nathaniel with quiet assessment. I believe you are truly repentant, father-in-law. Nathaniel nodded, humbled by her perception. I try to be, he said simply. James rose abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the street. For several moments, he stood with his back to the room, shoulders tense. When he finally turned, his expression was resolute. When is this hearing? He asked. Tomorrow morning, Nathaniel replied. Then I'll be there, James declared, to support both of you. The simple statement, unexpected yet profoundly welcome, brought a lump to Nathaniel's throat. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. There were too many years of hurt for that to happen in a single conversation. But it was a beginning, a willingness to move forward rather than remain trapped in the past. Thank you, son. He managed, his voice rough with emotion. The conversation shifted then to more practical matters, the security arrangements for the hearing, the likelihood of Silver Creek's response, the still unresolved threat posed by Harrington's disappearance. Throughout it all, Nathaniel was acutely aware of the newfound connection with his son, fragile but real, and of Rebecca's quiet presence, a steadying force he had come to rely on more than he had realized. As evening approached, Mrs. Hollister announced that dinner was served, a simple but hearty meal that brought them all together around the boarding-house table. The conversation flowed more easily now. Tensions eased by the shared meal and the natural charm of Elena, who drew out stories of Nathaniel's ranch and Rebecca's healing knowledge with genuine interest. For Nathaniel, it was a glimpse of what might be possible. A family reunited, new connections formed the possibility of a future not defined solely by the mistakes of the past. It was more than he had dared to hope for, even as he recognized how tenuous it all was, how dependent on the outcome of tomorrow's hearing and the continued absence of those who wished them harm. But for tonight, in this moment, it was enough. The courthouse was crowded the next morning, word of the extraordinary hearing having spread throughout Tucson. Silver Creek Mining Company had sent a contingent of attorneys, stern-faced men in expensive suits, who clustered together at one table, papers spread before them like weapons. Judge Monroe entered precisely at 9 o'clock, his black robes lending him an air of austere authority. The room fell silent as he took his seat, surveying the assembled crowd with a measured gaze. This preliminary hearing, he began, his voice carrying easily through the room, is to determine whether sufficient evidence exists to warrant a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding the destruction of a mixed settlement near the Gila River in 1868 and the subsequent acquisition of that land by Silver Creek Mining Company. He outlined the parameters of the proceeding. Witnesses would be called, evidence presented, but no final judgment would be rendered today. This was merely the first step in what promised to be a lengthy legal process. Rebecca was called first, rising from her seat beside Nathaniel to take the witness stand. She wore her simplest dress, her hair pulled back in a neat braid, her demeanor composed despite the gravity of the moment. For over an hour she testified about her childhood in the settlement the night of the attack, her subsequent life with the settler family, and the years of captivity that followed. She spoke clearly and directly, her voice steady, even when recounting the most painful memories. When questioned about Fallon's death, she admitted responsibility without hesitation, explaining the circumstances with the same unflinching honesty. Throughout her testimony, Nathaniel watched the faces of the spectators, gauging their reactions. Most seemed moved by Rebecca's account, their expressions shifting from skepticism to sympathy as her story unfolded. Even some of Silver Creek's attorneys appeared discomfited, exchanging glances that suggested they had not anticipated such a compelling witness. When Rebecca finally stepped down, returning to her seat with dignity and tact, the courtroom remained silent for several moments, the weight of her testimony hanging in the air. Then it was Nathaniel's turn. As he took the stand, he was acutely aware of James and Elena in the gallery, watching with expressions that mingled support and apprehension. This was the moment of truth, not just for the case against Silver Creek, but for his relationship with his son. Nathaniel spoke without embellishment, detailing his role in the attack, the orders he had received, and the doubts he had harbored even as he carried them out. He described finding Rebecca in the burning house, his decision to save her despite orders to the contrary, and the guilt that had haunted him in the years since. When questioned about the recent events finding Rebecca in the desert, the threats from Harrington, the discovery of the evidence, he responded with the same straightforward honesty. Yes, he had initially concealed his identity from Rebecca. Yes, he had risked his life to help her find the truth. No, he had no ulterior motive beyond attempting to right a wrong he had helped perpetrate. The Silver Creek attorneys cross-examined him aggressively, attempting to undermine his credibility by highlighting his role in the attack, and suggesting that his current testimony was motivated by guilt rather than truth. Nathaniel weathered their questions calmly, neither denying his past actions nor allowing them to distract from the central facts of the case. By the time he returned to his seat, the mood in the courtroom had shifted perceptibly. What had begun as a seemingly implausible accusation against a respected company had transformed into a credible case supported by both documentary evidence and compelling testimony. Judge Monroe called a brief recess before Silver Creek's representatives would present their response. As the courtroom emptied partially, James approached Nathaniel and Rebecca, his expression thoughtful. "That couldn't have been easy," he said to his father, admitting all of that in public. Nathaniel shrugged slightly. "Easier than living with it in silence all these years." James nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I never realized, when I found those reports, I saw only what you had done, not what it had cost you." "It cost others far more," Nathaniel replied, glancing at Rebecca. "That's the point of all this." Before James could respond, the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. A commotion erupted as several men pushed their way through the crowd. At their center was Wesley Harrington, his face contorted with rage, a revolver in his hand. "There she is," he shouted, pointing the weapon at Rebecca. "The lying whore who killed Fallon." Everything happened with startling speed after that. The federal marshals stationed near the front of the courtroom drew their weapons. Blackwood, seated nearby, lunged toward Harrington. Nathaniel moved instinctively, placing himself between Rebecca and the threat. A shot rang out deafening in the enclosed space. Nathaniel felt a searing pain in his shoulder, the impact driving him back against Rebecca. Another shot followed immediately, and Harrington staggered Blackwood's bullet, finding its mark. Chaos erupted in the courtroom, people screaming, running for the exits, marshals shouting orders. Through it all, Nathaniel remained focused on Rebecca, ensuring she was unharmed, despite the blood now seeping through his own shirt. "Nathaniel," her voice reached him through the din, her hands supporting him as his knees threatened to buckle. "You're hit." "It's nothing," he assured her, though the pain suggested otherwise. Just a graze. It was more than that, as became evident when he was helped to a nearby chair. The bullet had struck his upper chest just below the collarbone, painful and bleeding freely, but not immediately life-threatening if treated promptly. As a doctor was summoned and order gradually restored to the courtroom, Nathaniel became aware of James kneeling beside him, his face pale with concern. "Always were too quick to put yourself in harm's way," his son chided, though there was no real reproach in his tone. "Old habits," Nathaniel replied weakly. "Rebecca." "I'm here," she assured him, appearing on his other side. "Thanks to you." Harrington had been subdued, his wound serious but not fatal. As he was led away by the marshals, he continued to shout threats and accusations, his words increasingly incoherent. The men who had accompanied him, hired guns by the look of them, were also in custody. Judge Monroe, visibly shaken but maintaining his judicial composure, ordered the courtroom cleared, except for essential personnel. The hearing would be suspended until the following day, he announced, but his preliminary ruling would stand. Silver Creek's operations on the disputed land would remain frozen, pending a full investigation. For Nathaniel, the next few hours passed in a blur of pain and medical attention. The doctor who attended him was competent and efficient, extracting the bullet and binding the wound with practiced hands. The injury was significant, but clean through and through that had missed vital structures by mere inches. "You're lucky, Mr. Redgrave," the doctor observed as he completed his work. "Another inch to the right, and we'd be having a very different conversation." Nathaniel nodded, too exhausted to reply. The combination of blood loss pain and the emotional strain of the day had left him drained beyond words. Rebecca stayed by his side throughout her presence, a comfort he hadn't known he needed. James and Elena visited briefly, once the doctor had finished, bringing word that Harrington was under heavy guard at the jail, unlikely to pose any further threat. "The hearing will continue tomorrow," James reported. Judge Monroe was clear that today's incident only strengthens the case for a full investigation. Silver Creek's attorneys looked positively ill when Harrington burst in. "Good," Nathaniel managed. "They should be worried." As evening approached, he was moved to a proper bed in one of the boarding house's ground-floor rooms, the stairs to his original quarters deemed too challenging in his current state. Rebecca helped him settle, adjusting pillows and ensuring he had water within reach. "You should rest," she told him, her voice gentle but firm. "The doctor said you lost a fair amount of blood." Nathaniel caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Stay," he said simply. "Just for a while." She hesitated, then nodded, pulling a chair closer to the bed. They sat in comfortable silence for a time, the events of the day settling around them like dust after a storm. "He could have killed you," Rebecca finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you hadn't moved when you did." "But he didn't," Nathaniel countered. "And now he's where he belongs, along with the truth about Silver Creek." "Thanks to you." She squeezed his hand lightly. "You saved my life. Again." Nathaniel shook his head slightly. "We saved each other, I think, in more ways than one." The simple observation contained a profound truth. Their unlikely alliance, born of shared trauma and the strange symmetry of fate, had evolved into something neither could have anticipated, a healing force for them both. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, echoing the question they had considered the night before, though the context had shifted dramatically since then. Nathaniel thought about James and Elena, about the small grandson who bore his name, about the ranch waiting for his return, about the woman sitting beside him, now all the connections that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. "Now," he said slowly, "we build something new. not forgetting the past, but not imprisoned by it either. Rebecca's expression softened with understanding. Together, if you're willing, Nathaniel replied, the question in his eyes matching the one in his words. Her answer came without hesitation, a simple affirmation that carried the weight of all they had endured and all they might yet become. I am. Outside, the sun was setting over Tucson, casting long shadows across the street. In the distance, the mountains stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, eternal witnesses to the brief, bright moments of human life unfolding beneath their gaze. Within the quiet room, two souls, scarred by the same tragedy, had found in each other not just understanding, but the possibility of redemption. Not an ending, but a beginning. 3 days later, Nathaniel stood on the porch of his ranch house, surveying the property with new eyes. The charred remains of the barn had been cleared away, the foundation laid for a new structure. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distant pasture, untroubled by the dramatic events that had altered the lives of their human caretakers. His wound was healing well, though the doctor in Tucson had warned it would be several weeks before he could resume heavy labor. No matter, there were hands enough to help now. James had decided to extend their visit, Elena agreeing that the desert air would be good for little Nathaniel. And Rebecca. She emerged from the house carrying a tray with coffee and fresh-baked biscuits. The domestic gesture seemed both incongruous and perfectly natural, given all they had been through together. The hearing is formally adjourned, she announced, setting the tray on the small table between the porch chairs. Blackwood just rode out to tell us. Judge Monroe has ordered a full federal investigation into Silver Creek mining and the circumstances of the land acquisition. Nathaniel nodded, accepting the cup she offered him. Good news. There's more, Rebecca continued, taking the seat beside him. The judge has granted a preliminary recognition of the original settlement's legal status. If the investigation confirms what we've presented, the land will be restored to the survivors or their descendants. To you, Nathaniel clarified. Rebecca nodded, a mixture of emotions playing across her face. To me, and to any others we might find. She paused, sipping her coffee. It's more than I ever expected. You deserve it, Nathaniel said simply. Your people deserve it. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching as James emerged from the barn, leading a horse for Elena to ride. The young couple had planned an excursion to a nearby spring, a rare moment of leisure in the busy days since their arrival. I've been thinking, Rebecca said eventually, about what I might do with the land if it's restored. Nathaniel turned to her, curious. And I'd like to rebuild the settlement, she said, her voice gaining strength as she outlined the vision. Not exactly as it was, that's not possible, but something in the same spirit. A place where people of different backgrounds can live together, learn from each other. She glanced at him, suddenly uncertain. Is that foolish? Not at all, Nathaniel assured her. It's fitting, honoring what was lost by creating something new. Rebecca smiled, relieved by his understanding. I'd need help, of course. People with skills I don't have. Knowledge of building, of managing land. The invitation in her words was clear, though delicately phrased. Nathaniel considered it, carefully aware of the weight of the decision for them both. I might know someone with those skills, he said finally. An old rancher looking for a new purpose. Bit rough around the edges, but willing to learn. Rebecca's smile deepened. I think he would be most welcome. The simplicity of the exchange belied the profound commitment it represented, not just to the project of rebuilding, but to each other, to the unexpected bond that had formed between them through shared hardship and healing. From inside the house came the sound of the baby crying, followed by Elena's gentle voice singing a Spanish lullaby. James appeared on the porch, little Nathaniel in his arms. "Someone's not happy about being left behind," he announced, attempting to soothe the fussing infant. "Thought he might like some fresh air." Rebecca held out her arms. "May I?" James transferred the baby to her with evident relief. "Be my guest. He's been restless all morning." To everyone's surprise, little Nathaniel quieted almost immediately in Rebecca's embrace, his cries subsiding to curious coos as he studied her face with solemn interest. "Well, would you look at that?" James remarked. "Seems he knows quality when he sees it." Rebecca laughed softly, the sound lighter and more carefree than Nathaniel had ever heard from her. "He's a good judge of character," she agreed gently, rocking the contented infant. The domestic scene, so ordinary, yet so extraordinary, given the circumstances that had brought them all together, filled Nathaniel with a quiet joy he had long since forgotten was possible. This was what redemption looked like, he realized. Not a dramatic absolution, not the erasure of past sins, but this, the patient daily work of building something worthwhile from the ashes of what had been destroyed. As the sun climbed higher in the Arizona sky, casting its golden light over the ranch, and the people gathered there, Nathaniel Redgrave felt something he had not experienced in 17 years. Peace. Not the empty peace of isolation, but the rich, complex peace that comes from connection, from purpose, from the knowledge that even the deepest wounds can in time be healed. Not completely, never completely, but enough to allow new life to flourish, where once there had been only pain. And in the end, that was enough.